Hello, everybody. In this interview, I would love to introduce you to a living public intellectual, something that has become rare in modern politically and materially driven discourse. John David Ebert is a cultural critic and the author of more than 25 books on culture, history, philosophy, cinema, and fiction. He's a thinker who's largely been erased from the internet because his eclectic philosophical approach doesn't fit neatly into the categories modern academia has created. As surprising as it may seem, John was the first to pioneer the genre of book analysis on YouTube. He started sharing intellectual content back in 2008, when YouTube was a very different platform from what it is today. In many ways, he has been an inspiration for my channel and my own intellectual work. So without further ado, I would love to present my first conversation with John. All right then. Hello, Mr. Ebert. Thank you for being here. I'm really honored to have a conversation with you. As Marshall McLuhan says, the world is truly a global village. Now that I have the chance to speak to you since you are from United States, I'm from Georgia, a different hemisphere. And now I can directly speak to you, which is really unfathomable for me. I mean, because
it's pretty amazing what we can do with these global technologies. No, it's a pleasure to be here, Nicholas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, here's the thing. Before I start interviewing you, I think I have to say it. I guess I had a hard time to accept the fact that I am a product of the digital paradigm. Because, I've always understood that you, as someone who, has intellectual goals in his life and wants to pursue intellectual endeavors, you really need a mentor and you really need someone who you trust and who you believe has the right thing that you should emulate. And I couldn't really find someone in my physical vicinity, I guess. And the only person that I could emulate and that I knew was close to what I was thinking is true and is worth pursuing was you. And I went on to realize that, I guess you have to accept the fact that your intellectual hero, in some sense, is a digital one. At least for now. I hope there will be a time when we can meet in person. But I mean, for now, I accept it. And in some sense, it works. It works because I've learned a lot from you. I've read lots of books and worked on lots of philosophers that we're going to discuss today, that I've heard from you. So, I guess with all its drawbacks and benefits, it is what it is, and I have to accept the digital paradigm and thank it for the opportunity that I'm talking to you. So, welcome to the interview, I guess. Mr. Ebert, first of all, I guess I want to start this interview by asking you about the current situation in universities and in academy. I'm pretty dissatisfied with it, but I know that you have a pretty rough critique of what's going on in universities right now. And you have a pretty, serious analysis of the current condition of humanities, how they are specialized and atomized, how true education is no longer available in universities. So I just want you to give us a general overview of your diagnosis regarding the current state of education and academia in general.
Sure. I'm an autodidact. I'm mostly self-taught.
Yeah.
I got a BA in English from Arizona State University. And after that, I was just opening up into the world of Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West, the books of Joseph Campbell on mythology, Carl Jung, and so forth. Excuse me. And I knew I wanted the big picture, especially the way those guys present the big picture, and the university was not supplying that at all. They wanted me to specialize, and I wanted to be a generalist. So there's already that problem that's inherently intrinsic to the university, no matter what the political conditions are. There's the problem of specialization. They want you to specialize, and I didn't want to specialize, so I knew we weren't going to get along. And by that point, I already had a trajectory of thought that I was pursuing, which was namely German idealist philosophy. We had gone through Immanuel Kant in class. That was actually something I discovered in a philosophy class. And Kant got me thinking, and then after I graduated, I read through the Critique of Pure Reason twice, and then followed that with reading through the collected works of Goethe, what's been translated into English of Goethe, which is quite a bit, actually. There's a very good collected works. So that in and of itself was an education, a self-education. Going through Kant and Goethe, you're not going to find two brighter minds on the planet in the past or the present. Just not going to happen. And then so going through all of Carl Jung's works, learning the language of comparative mythology, all these different kinds of tools that I was slowly brought media studies into my ambit, and it was just that process. Now the university system has become so infected with the woke left that you almost can't say anything anymore. There is no such thing as freedom of speech, even though supposedly this country was founded on the First Amendment, right? Not anymore it is. So the left has completely hijacked the system, and you have to be careful what you say. I have a few friends who are academics, one of whom interviewed me, and he kept contacting me saying, oh, you got to splice out what I said. I made a comment there, you got to splice that out, because he was worried about getting tenure. So that's the whole thing. There is no freedom of speech at all. And I just like to be able to say what I think without caring or worrying about whatever people think of what I say. So the university is just not a good system for me. Instead, I founded my own online school on the platform known as Teachable, the John David Ebert School for the Study of Culture, Cosmology, and the Arts. And we've done about 15, 16 classes so far. It's been up and running for about 2.5 years. Right now we're in the middle of Paul Virilio, going through him. Next we're going to go through Heidegger. And then after that, Derrida and Foucault and company, all those, the giants of postmodern philosophy. So we'll go through all that. And we're also reading Thomas Pynchon's novel Mason and Dixon. We're just starting on that, right, which is a masterpiece. So that's what's happening right now.
Okay. So I guess the follow-up question naturally from that would be to analyze what causes brought forth this sort of specialization and death of general outlook and death of meta-narratives, whereby you are in humanities nowadays you are unable to see the big picture. And what the first author, I guess, that came to my mind, which I of course learned from you, was Arnold Toynbee, who in his study of history explores this phenomenon, and he says that there is such thing as apathetic fallacy, which is going on in humanities, whereby, intellectuals in humanities, they assume a role of a scientist, and they start to call their seminars laboratories, and they no longer treat their subject matter as organic and alive. And Toynbee traces it back to Industrial Revolution, when he says that basically nowadays universities, they just want to produce raw material. They just want to produce papers. They want to produce studies. And he said that, I even remember him saying that when he was a kid or something of that sort, he used to see those big tomes on his shelf, which were usually substituted by those very specialized, tiny, the books that were so myopic, and so on and so forth. So I guess, do you agree with Toynbee's analysis of what happened to humanity and why it happened?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is part of the industrialization. The specialization comes from that. You have to be an expert in your particular field, so that when we have a question for, let's say, about the Neanderthals, when they first started burying their dead, we go to Eric Trinkaus, who is he was out here at the University of New Mexico, who's the Neanderthal specialist, and he's a good guy actually. He's got good thoughts. The Neanderthals have been deontologized for a while because of the out of Africa hypothesis, whereby modern Homo, this is just an example I'm drawing here, whereby modern Homo sapiens, which go back now about 200,000 years, coming out of Africa and then migrating up through Palestine, and then they enter into Europe about 40,000 years ago. So it used to be thought there was a possibility that modern Homo sapiens were a mutation from Neanderthals. But in this out of Africa theory, that's not the case. So we need to make Neanderthals look as brutish and as other as possible. So we go back over the Emil Bechler, the archaeologist who discovered their cave bear stashes. They were worshiping the cave bear, and they had stashes of skulls arranged geometrically in cabinets and so forth. So they go back in and they deconstruct his archaeology and said, no, Bechler did a bad job. The Neanderthals were congenital atheists. They were lunkheads. They didn't have art. Guess what? Was found out just within a year, I believe, the Neanderthals invented cave painting. This is a brand new thing. There's art found in caves dating back from 60,000 years ago, 20,000 years before modern Homo sapiens are in Europe. So apparently they weren't such lunkheads after all. That's just one example of the problem with specialization. You want to go to an expert, but it's an expert that you trust. Trenkhaus is a reliable authority. He wasn't trying to deontologize Neanderthals, but that's an example of the problem. Yeah, I agree with Toynbee's assessment. Absolutely. It was just a gradual process that happened. He starts right off his rewrite of a study of history, which is, he wrote in his old age in the 1970s. He went back and re-edited it himself into a single volume edition that's large and beautifully illustrated. That's the version I recommend to anyone who wants to read Toynbee without having to struggle through 12 volumes.
Yeah.
I made the attempt a couple times, but didn't get past like the third or fourth volume. Too much. The dude's encyclopedic erudition is off the charts. So yeah, he's one of the guys I respect.
Yeah, I mean, apart from you, I guess I don't really. I mean, except for you, I don't really find anyone who resembles Toynbee in contemporary intellectual society, I guess.
They're gone. It's an extinct species.
Yeah,
Neanderthals.
As for the Neanderthals, didn't they find a skull, I guess, with the red ochre, which is supposed to symbolize, as you've wrote in your books, sort of the idea that they're painting it with red ochre because they believe that it's a menstrual blood that will help them.
Not so much the Neanderthals. Yeah. They were using red ochre for their paintings, probably for tattoos, body markings, but they didn't use it for burying the dead.
Okay.
That tradition comes from modern Homo sapiens in Palestine. The oldest burial that we have is 120,000 years ago from Kafsa Cave. A woman buried there with her infants at her feet. Yeah. And the whole thing is sprinkled with red ochre. And red ochre becomes a staple for burials all the way up through China, down into the New World, and so forth. So what is it? It was my mentor, William Owen Thompson, who had the idea, and I think he's correct, that it symbolizes menstrual blood. Because when a woman is pregnant, she stops menstruating. The assumption throughout history had been she's using that blood to build a new fetus. So this is the blood, you might say symbolically, the menstrual blood of Gaia that we sprinkle on for her to make a new body. So when the soul returns, there'll be a new body waiting for that soul. But Neanderthals did pick it up in their final phase, what's known as the Chattoperonian phase, which is about 30,000 years ago. They're extinct by 25,000 years ago. But they have a last brief flash where they're being influenced by the culture industry of the Homo sapiens. And so they bring in red ochre and they start putting it on the dead at that point. But that's something they've gotten from modern Homo sapiens, who used to be called Cro-Magnon. Yeah. Same thing.
The Paleolithic ones that basically began I guess, there are genetic studies that links, more of a genetic studies that fall within the a decade, I guess, that showcase that there might be some connection with Neanderthal genetic heritage and abstract reasoning and abstract thought.
Probably from rapes. Because that's standard practice. When a new population moves into a territory, they rape the women.
There was an
owning the territory, you might say. Yeah.
Exactly. So you've also mentioned that you have a school, John David Ebert School of Cultural Cosmology, and it's been pretty successful. I will make sure to include the link in my video. Now, regarding that, do you believe that I guess digital education is in some sense future of education?
It's the wave of the future. Yeah, COVID had something to do with that. A lot of people had to stay home and do online classes. And it just so happened that I created my school in about the same time that COVID hit, just because the thought just occurred to me, why don't I just create my own school? If you dislike the current system, like Aristotle comes into a conflict with his mentor, Plato, he goes and founds his own lyceum. And now he's got his own school. That's sort of what you have to do when you are up against an authority, a so-called authority that you don't respect or agree with. You go the other way. This is how culture works in a larger sense. New villages spring up because there's a dispute in a village between one headman and another. They get into a fight, so they leave and they say, I'm going to take my people with me and we're going to go create a new village. That's the way it was done during the Neolithic, with the villages as they're moving down the Euphrates. Dispute is the common, it's what Toynbee calls a disaffection with the body social. And with the creative minority who have now degenerated into a creative
dominant minority.
Dominant minority who now seeks to lead by force and no longer by inspiration. It's a common process all over through history and across the planet.
Well, I mean, I guess the dominant minority, I mean, I guess the current situation of Western civilization is of the dominant minority, because, I mean, the creative minority of the...
You will jump through the hoops. I don't know how many professors told me that. You'll jump through my hoops. You'll do it exactly what I tell you to do. Guess what? Play that game. I'm making my own hoops over here. Thank you. Go do your hoops. So I've been kind of a rebel in that sense.
I mean, and even in terms of creativity, right? I mean, we've had, I guess, Newton, Einstein, Da Vinci, we've had Nietzsche, Enlightenment philosophers, scholastic philosophers, and what are the inventions of like the current dominant minority? I mean, I guess what, ChatGPT. So it's I mean, we don't really get the revolutionary theories anymore. I guess Spengler would say that West has exhausted its creative capacities. However, I guess before touching on that, I wanted to ask you about this idea that the digital education is the future, and I guess that those digital schools becoming more and more popular. Wouldn't that be in accordance with what Marshall McLuhan predicted, since we see that people who have like generalist minds, generalist consciousness, who see the big picture, they find internet more useful, and we have a sort of like an internet right hemisphere generalist approach against the university left brain specialized approach. And Marshall McLuhan, I guess, would say that the World Wide Web supports and brings forth generalists, since it's the medium for right brainers, I guess. Would you agree with the analysis?
Yeah, that's about right. I think he would say that if he was analyzing the internet, he would say that it's a centralizing technology. When he's talking about the difference between the railroad and the automobile, for instance, he'll say that the railroad centralizes. It brings goods in and centers them and creates a depot that eventually turns into a department store. I think the first department store in America was a train depot. It might have been Wanamaker's, if I remember right. And then, whereas the automobile decentralizes, it pulls neighborhoods apart, as Jane Jacobs spent her entire career talking about the disintegrative effects of the automobile on cities. Same thing you can with the internet. I think it's socially disintegrative. For as far as the social aspect of it goes, I think Twitter is just a field for people to insult each other with no consequences. So when you have consequence-free insults, it just becomes a machine for heating people up, getting them riled up. So it's socially disintegrative. But it is an ideal medium for someone like me, a generalist, because it's intellectually centralizing. Because it is the modern Alexandria. This is, I think Spengler would say if he was around, this is the equivalent of a modern Alexandria. It comes in at the tail end of the civilization, right about the same time that Alexandria does come in. And it becomes the center for knowledge, because we've got all knowledge that has ever existed, at least that we are aware of, inside this machine here. So it is centralized. It pulls knowledge together. So initially I was very critical of the internet back in my book, New Media Invasion, which I wrote in 2011.
I read that book and I recommend it to everyone. I mean, that's it's really good.
It was a lot of fun, but I've since warmed up to it. After all, I meet people like you on here. You're in Georgia. I'm in New Mexico. What are the odds that our paths would ever have crossed right? without the internet. So we do owe it some things. Yeah, the internet gods. Mercury would be the god of the internet, the communications, light speed with his wings on his feet. That's light speed communication. So we'll give thanks here to Mercury.
Right. You mentioned Twitter, and it's very interesting because honestly, although I guess I'm a product of the digital world, and my central nervous system is pretty much adapted to the internet, short-term stimulation type, I guess, paradigm. When I went to Twitter after Elon Musk purchased it, it was such an overstimulation, this completely disconnected pieces of insults, and, you can't really, there's no meta-narrative on Twitter right now. Everyone is just saying whatever they want to say, and it's just, I guess, as you say, it's just insulting one another and saying all the offensive stuff. Now, before Twitter, I was pretty angry and frustrated with YouTube and its communist-like policy of suppressing freedom of speech. However, the Twitter, with its extreme freedom of speech, I guess, it didn't. The place is inhospitable in some sense, Twitter. So I guess that really gives birth to a new question. Is there a balance between like censorship and free speech, or like Twitter's this overstimulation of offensive speech on Twitter is just, I guess, an eruption of these suppressed voices that people, the fact that people couldn't talk before Twitter for so long? Or how do you predict, or how do you analyze that situation?
Yeah, here's where you bring in a media studies analysis, a la McLuhan, which is to say that you have to become aware of the bias of a medium. There is no such thing as a neutral medium. Neither politically nor epistemologically. Neil Postman, who was a guy who respected McLuhan very much, he's a New York intellectual, talks in his book about amusing ourselves to death. And he says that he starts that book out by saying, let's take the medium of smoke signals. Native Americans, they used smoke signals to communicate back then. They did. I'm sure they don't now. The medium of smoke signals excludes philosophy. Okay, you can't do philosophy with that medium. So with television excludes thought, intelligent, rational thought, what are called dismissively talking heads, for entertainment. So information has to be in the form of entertainment in order for it to arrive on television. So there's that bias. So every medium has its own sort of epistemological bias, but then nowadays with the social media, they all have a political bias. So if you're getting your knowledge from YouTube is far left woke. So you have to question what you're getting. If it's true, or is it propaganda regarding the two current wars right now in Palestine and in Ukraine. There's a lot of false information coming out about those wars. And so when you get that information, you have to be aware, what's the political bias here? On Twitter, you have Elon Musk. His bias is libertarian. It's neither left nor right, but it is freedom of speech. And I'm glad he brought that back on there. But I left Twitter about the same time that he was purchasing it. I knew he was going to. So there's that. So every one of these social media has a bias. So you have to be aware that the information that you're getting is distorted a priori, as we would say in philosophy. There's that.
Yeah. So since you mentioned media and analyzing current social outlets through McLuhan's media analysis, I guess I would like to explore the current trends in social media that are especially popular amongst youngsters. And one such is this that I'm right now I'm doing a video on it, I guess. And one such is this, I don't know if you've heard or if you followed it, this is Red Pill Alpha Male movement. I don't know if you're, yeah.
I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, okay, so.
You'll have to enlighten me here.
Yeah, so let me give you like a brief breakdown, okay? So we have got a new trend that I guess was exploded through Andrew Tate. And so the crux of it is that we have like tall, we have basically like males who flaunt their cars, their women. They treat women as like they have this idea that you should have a harem of females, that a man is the boss. You should have all the money, you should have cars, you should have muscles, that they are all tall and big. And this whole idea with this, that they, like, their idea is to teach youngsters to be men, to be real men, to stand up. And, those guys, mostly they're very narcissistic, very Machiavellian. Most of them, you don't know how they got their money, but they teach you how to, how to earn money. And it's mostly very Spenglerian in the sense that all they concentrate is looks, money. Andrew Tate is famous for saying that books is for stupid people, that you shouldn't read books. It's a waste of time.
It shows in his case. That he doesn't read books because all he does is opinionate. He doesn't understand the difference between thinking critically and just spouting an opinion from your emotions. Those are two different areas in the brain. The neocortex is thought, and it is developed and sharpened by reading, which, by the way, also, as McLuhan pointed out, strengthens your eye muscles as you're moving left, right.
The horizontal line,
eye muscles prevents dyslexia. Kids who are dyslexic are kids who have grown up watching television before they learned how to read.
That's a very good thing you mentioned that, because the video which I will publish will involve the dyslexia part, because what I've seen is that most of those alpha male gurus who do this, courses on how to be a real man, most of them have dyslexia. Most of them, they're very their attention span is non-existent. They're very temperamental. They're emotionally reactive. You cannot picture them ever sitting down and reading a book from cover to cover.
It's a product of the digital age. They're a special waste byproduct, you might say, of the digital age.
Yeah, and what's interesting about this, I guess, this alpha male red pill, the reason why it's called red pill is basically it's like a red pill that you swallow, and it has to do with women. So basically the red pill society is based on this idea that nowadays females are not worthy of respect because they are promiscuous, and you should basically make out of it as much as possible. You should exploit them sexually, and if you ever marry a woman, it should be a traditional one, but mostly like their rhetoric is around insulting promiscuous women, which and mostly they are cancelled because of misogyny, which is very interesting because you would naturally, if we apply Leonard Schleine's reasoning, you would naturally think that since we are not in the visual age, in the analytic age anymore, there should be no misogyny anymore, because Leonard Schlein argued that misogyny is the product of the visual left hemisphere, masculine age. However, what we see in this culture is that although they are misogynistic in that sense, they do have this reverence towards this great mother archetype. So Andrew Tate would say that that you should give, like, you should gift your woman a lot of gifts. You should give her money. She should live like a queen. She should not worry about anything, this and that. So it has its another side, right? It's misogynistic, but also it's very reverent towards this great mother archetype of, you're beautiful, you're pretty, and you can have everything you want. So would you say that is in some sense a product of more of a dark age period that you do analyze in your media invasion book, when you say that we are
it's certainly part of a social dark age, kind of Spenglerian decline into shallow materialism, sensationalism. As the intellect of the society dies down, the senses, which is the realm in astrology associated with Venus, the pleasure principle, that gets stepped up, and consequently you get porn. Porn comes in at the tail end of every civilization. In India, the great pornographic temples that they have, very large temples such as at Bhubaneswara and Khajuraho, those come in at the tail end of Indian civilization, about 1200 BC, as it's dying down. Even the most metaphysical civilization on the planet, declines into pornography. Not that I have anything against pornography, I certainly do not. But this is just an analysis of when it appears why it appears. But it comes in at the tail end of a civilization. And so with all these, couple of points to make. One, the invocation of the Great Mother archetype is it's a psychological compensation. You idealize what you are critical of. So if you're critical of women because they're promiscuous, and you want to just turn them into your slaves or a harem or whatever, which is a little spiritually immature. It's just not a mature outlook. But you compensate by saying, well, there's this Great Mother archetype that we're worshiping. That's just a compensation. It's like Jung used to say, barbarism, or let's say a chivalry in the Middle Ages, that the chivalric attitude toward women is a cover for brutality. So it's a counter-compensation. Mentally savages. So they pretend that they're the exact opposite. That's a counter-compensation. I think Jung's pretty sharp there on that. But that's a lot of what is going on. And I think if you invoke Gebser here, you have to say, well, if we're in a new consciousness structure, the integral consciousness structure, as he calls it, that he sees coming into being in the middle of the 19th century, exactly where Spengler sees the West falling apart. And that antinomy between Gebser and Spengler, because I think they're both right, can be resolved rather easily by saying, well, Spengler is looking at the decline of the perspectival phase of the mental consciousness structure that begins with Leonardo and comes to an end about the time of Nietzsche, roughly right in there. Same period that Heidegger says an age is ending here too. The metaphysical age that he sees beginning with Plato. That comes to an end there, and he's got the idea of a new beginning that he brings into philosophy. So Gebser, though, notes that with the rise of the integral consciousness structure, you can already see it foreshadowing in the French Revolution, which is anti-patriarchal. Let's kill daddy, kill the king, get rid of the king. That's the patriarchal structure that's part of the mental consciousness structure, which is patriarchal. So that starts happening, and he starts noticing phenomena rising from the left, because it's based on the right. Mental consciousness is based on the right. So, and the left is always sinister. So up comes the masses from the left. We get the 1848 revolution. There's a series of revolutions with the left rising up and up. And everything that the right has suppressed, including women. So women come along, and we get the women's movement as the 20th century unfolds, feminism and the feminist movement. But Gebser sees this as a balancing mechanism that's taking place whereby what has been repressed by what Derrida calls the logocentric age, which is the same thing as the metaphysical age, has to be allowed to come up in order to form a balance. So he sees what's happening with the rise of the left, with minorities, women, the rise of progressive thinking and so forth. All of that is a waking up from the tyranny of the metaphysical age, the mental consciousness structure, to use his vocabulary. So there has to be a balance between the sexes. Because with the mythical consciousness structure, which goes all the way back to Sumer and Egypt, it's been matriarchal. That whole structure was matriarchal. The mental structure that comes in with the Greeks and the Hebrews and so forth is all patriarchal. So now there needs to be an integral, a balance between both. And that's what we're experiencing. So once you get a shift too far in one direction to the right, then you're going to have to compensate with a shift far other direction, so that we can come back to a happy medium. And so we haven't come back to that happy medium between men and women yet. So many men, like the ones you're describing here, have been damaged and made to feel low self-esteem for being, just for being men. Men are men. They're good at stuff. That's why we have them. So it doesn't make any sense to denigrate men just to say that they're all rapists. I've never had a rape fantasy in my life, so I'm not sure what they're talking about exactly. All men are rapists. And I know I've read Andrea Dworkin, by the way. I had to read it I had to proofread her collected works. And this is radical feminism, which completely rejects men. Completely, totally, and thoroughly, no exceptions. So I've read that her collection there that I helped proofread for Semiotics, so I know what the thoughts are. And it's very damaging to men. We're not going to get anywhere by with the two sexes throwing stones at each other. We're not going to get anywhere. There has to be a mutual respect and appreciation. We've got to get to that center, but we're not there yet. So we're still going through the social chaos of the rising of the left, women and minorities. But it will settle down into an equilibrium at some point.
I guess since you mentioned feminism, I guess it's an opportunity for me to squeeze one or two questions about it. So from my, I guess, superficial analysis of it, if we approach the feminine masculine from like I guess Gebserian Leonard Schleine's perspective, whereby masculine and feminine has to do with the consciousness structure, whereby feminine consciousness is more of a synthetic and generalist, and masculine is more directed, that divides everything up, and it's very forward-looking and specific and focused and triangular, as Gebser's mental consciousness structure is. Wouldn't you say that the feminists, the European feminists, Mary Wollstonecraft, French ones, they, their reasoning is very masculine. I mean, their brains, their thought process, it's masculine and patriarchal. And I guess, there with this emergence of this alpha male culture that I've told you, there's also an emergence, the co-emergence of the alpha female culture with that, whereby you see these females who are, who have maxed out their looks, I guess, and they have this princess attitude whereby, I don't have to work, I just have to sit home, care about myself, care about children, and men should provide for me because I'm a princess. I don't have to do anything. I just have to be beautiful, this and that. So I guess now there is a sort of an opposition between this sort of masculine, patriarchally thinking feminists and females who want to preserve their I guess feminine, more of a I don't know whether irresponsible is the right word, but I guess outsourcing consciousness, where they would like to outsource most of the hard stuff to their husbands. So would you agree with this idea that most feminists, they have a conception of what it means to be a woman that doesn't really resonate with most females?
Yeah, it's kind of there's a mismatch there. With most females do want to just be taken care of, so they can go to Walmart and spend their checks on their husband's paychecks on Fridays. It's a common syndrome. It's very common. But the feminist idea with the woman as the Amazon rejects that whole order. That's giving too much power to men. If your man is taking care of you, then you're not truly a woman. You're in the feminist sense of being liberated. They like to invoke that Amazon archetype, which I find fascinating. It's kind of interesting. The Amazonian archetype, the complete rejection of this struggle between men and women. It's been going on for a long, long time. Bachofen was the first to analyze this in his book Mother Right, which came out in 1865-ish, I believe, in the 1860s. And he went back and he examined the Greek myths, and he looks at the myths where the Amazons come in, and he says that the Amazonian myths are always invoked in response to abuses by men, but by the patriarchy that has come before them. He sees history as going through these phases, with the Aphrodite, the first phase being the sort of primitive caveman phase of the Aphroditic-Hetyric archetype, Aphrodite being the same thing as Venus, where sex is just promiscuous. Nobody knows who's descended from whom, and it's a total mess. He may have something there. It may have been like that down in the lower Paleolithic, more likely than the upper Paleolithic, something like that. And then eventually that transforms and brings in, it's just the same thing as Gebser's mythical consciousness structure. You bring in the goddess Hera, the goddess of marriage, and along with that, agriculture. So when agriculture comes in, we get marriage coming in, and we get society settling down and becoming civilized with a balance between the sexes coming in. And then after that, we get the Amazonian reaction to abuse from the patriarchy against women, mistreating them. You can just see it in the Iliad and the Odyssey. Their women are property. They're like cows. They're property.
Yeah.
That's all. Think of the mess. They don't think of them as three-dimensional, actual people with their own personalities and values and so forth. So you can see that there's a problem there, and the Amazons react against that by rejecting men. There are a number of other myths too, such as the one on the island of Lemnos when Jason gets there, and he is very abusive when he gets there to the woman Hypsipyle, I think her name is. So we find all of this has all been
Sibylle, right?
There's nothing new here. that's going on, other than Gebser saying that now we're trying to integrate balance. We're trying to integrate not only the previous consciousness structures, the archaic, the magical, the mythical, and the mental. Those all now have to be balanced so that not a single one of them takes the lead and dictates to the rest of them. They all have their place. And the same thing with right and left, with men and women. That's why he calls it integral, and I believe that he was correct, that this is what exactly what has happened in Western civilization, this transformation of consciousness with modernist art, that all the Germans, except for Gebser, rejected. None of them, Rudolf Steiner, Jung, Heidegger, they all dismissed modernist art and literature as garbage, as junk. And Gebser was the first one to see, now wait a minute here, the same thing is going on in architecture, that's going on in literature, that's going on in philosophy.
Even in physics, yeah.
All about the eruption of time. Time becomes to the integral consciousness structure what space was to the mental perspectival consciousness structure. Einstein brings in time and form a spatio-temporal continuum. Time is now a fourth dimension. So time is integrated and brought in, and they're all doing it at the same time in the same Euro-American field space. And Spengler just simply missed this. So did Steiner, Jung. Jung dismissed modernist art. He wrote an essay on Picasso where he compared Picasso to the art of a schizophrenic. His essay on Ulysses is laughable. Ulysses grew wings and sailed over that dude's head. Despite his erudition, he missed it completely. Gebser didn't, though. He got it. And I think that we are in an integral consciousness structure right now, although with the postmodern turn, it became after World War II temporarily disintegral. That's what postmodernity and deconstruction is all about. It pulls apart modernism, which is what you see happening in the paintings of Mark Rothko, for instance, the great American artist in the 1950s. When you look at his early paintings, they're all sort of copies of modernist iconotypes like Miro, that kind of thing. And then you watch the forms melt like candle wax. And pretty soon we get these glowing semiotic vacancies. And that's what, it's a perfect image for the postmodern disintegral consciousness, which comes in and disintegrates the integral consciousness structure of modernist art. But I believe that in hypermodernity, which has come about since about 1995-ish, we're trying to reintegrate. We're trying to sweep up these pieces that deconstruction left all over the place and try to integrate it back into a single integral consciousness. And I think that's the task in front of us right now. Integrality.
Yeah.
It's the task of hypermodernity. Picking up the pieces. We want meaning now. We're tired of being told nothing means anything by postmodern atheist French philosophers with a shallow nihilistic worldview who insist that nothing means anything. Life is meaningless. Contemporary art is all about making fun of meaning in art. We're sick of that now. We're done with it because nihilism leads to suicide, high crime rates, spree killers. That all comes out of the nihilistic mentality that nothing means anything. Well, if nothing means anything and nobody is valuable, let's go out and shoot up a whole bunch of people. They're worthless. I'm worthless. Everyone's worthless. This is what postmodern thought tells us, right? And it's just it's a totally wrong paradigm. At least with Gebser, though I don't think he went fully into the full spiritual paradigm the way I have. He does have a spiritual attitude. He does regard the integral consciousness structure as bringing in spirituality fundamentally. Unfortunately, he makes the mistake of identifying it with Christianity and a revival of Christian values. That's a mistake that he made. That's totally wrong. Christianity needs to go. It's part of the problem. It's patriarchal. It views women, Augustine said, woman is a temple built above a sewer. That's the attitude of all of these incel theologians who founded the basic principles of Christianity, which are all opposed to the body. They're anti-somatic because it's part of a historical dialectic. We had the Greek celebration of the body and the Roman pornographic celebration of the body. So now there's a reaction against it with 2,000 years of an anti-somatic religion with a genitalist God. Augustine says that original sin is transmitted through semen, which is why it's so important for Mary to be a virgin. She has to be a pure vessel. The mother of Christ was not a virgin. We all know that. That's a silly Sunday school, kindergarten type of spiritual mentality. So all of that kind of thing with Christianity, it has to go. It's part of the problem.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've some follow-up questions on that. Well, let's do the Christianity part. Yeah, I mean, Jean Gebser, surprisingly, in the second volume of *Ever Present Origin*, does say that the integral consciousness structure will reveal itself through Christianity, and Christianity is becoming popular in some sense.
What a letdown that the ending of that book is.
Yeah,
it is consistent though with Spengler saying that there would be a second religiousness that would come in. But Spengler was a little more fluid, maybe not in Decline of the West. One gets the impression that when he talks about a second religiousness coming in, that he means a revival of Christianity. He might have meant that in that book, but he clarifies his position in his last book, The Hour of Decision. He specifically says there that the new religions that come in may not have anything at all to do with Christianity. So he realized that that might not necessarily be a reawakening of Christianity. I hope not. I hope that's not what it's going to come to. I think we've got, first of all, reincarnation has to be taken into account as a fact. It's an absolute fact. You cannot get away from it. There is nothing but evidence for it and almost none against it. Christianity anathematized reincarnation in the middle of the 6th century at the Second Council of Constantinople, if I remember right, because karmically it was in the way of the West's karmic task, which was to develop the ego. You find all this in Rudolf Steiner, by the way, to develop the ego and the critical faculties of the ego, and to see the individual as a unique and therefore non-repeatable metaphysical species unto himself. That was the West's task. Okay, by the time we get down to the end of the 19th century, Rudolf Steiner appears on stage and he says, task accomplished. Now let's bring back the truth, reincarnation and karma. And then he goes through to read the Akashic record, because Steiner had mediumistic abilities. He couldn't talk to the dead, but he could read the Akashic record, which is a collective memory that records basically everything that ever happens. It's recorded in this ether, so it can be accessed. And he's accessing it in his last great lecture cycle, Karmic Relationships, from about 1924-ish. I think he's dead by 26. And he goes through and he analyzes the karma that Marx and Engels have, for instance. He says, well, they had a property dispute. They were both adventurers back in the medieval period. I think he places them around the year 1000, something like that, about in there, where Engels, in that incarnation, when Marx left to go on an adventure, Engels came in and stole his property, took over his house, brought in his servants and so forth. And by the time Marx gets back with his group, he's been completely dispossessed. So they form a sort of cabal, scheming for how they can get their property back from Engels. So that karmically carried over into Marx and Engels, with Engels paying all of Marx's bills for him. Marx was poor all his life, and Engels had money. So he's paying back a karmic debt by supporting Marx with his theory of property that's a kind of revenge against the capitalist booty mentality, that property is just booty. It's for adventurers and Vikings to just take. It's simply a businessman's version of a Viking mentality, as Spengler would say. It's not in reincarnation have to be brought back in. And Steiner is not a goofball, some new age guy out of nowhere. He's embedded in the Western tradition because he started off writing German idealist philosophy. His first book, The Philosophy of Spiritual Freedom, it's a work of German idealist philosophy. He studied through Kant, Fichte, Hegel, Schelling, and he starts off wanting to be one of them, except that he has these abilities. He's seen ghosts before, so he has to keep that in the closet until he meets the Theosophists. And then at that point, he's around 40, and he comes out of the closet about all of his spirituality and his knowledge about karma and reincarnation. So he starts giving lectures for the Theosophical Society before he becomes disillusioned with them. And the reason for that was because Charles Leadbeater in India saw this kid, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and wanted to put him forward as the reincarnation of Christ. And Steiner's like, oh, no, you don't. His Christ is a god. It's basically a god that comes down from the sun and enters into the earth's astral plane and transubstantiates it. And it's a one-time only event. This is not a being that will reincarnate. So they broke over that theological dispute, and he went off and founded what he called anthroposophy, which is basically German theosophy. That's pretty much what it
Yeah.
is. But it's not case goofball stuff. Steiner had as high an IQ as an IQ gets. He founded biodynamic farming, agriculture, anthroposophical medicine, the Waldorf schools. What kind of genius is this guy? He's like a total intellectual singularity. So
I guess you don't want to associate Steiner with someone like Deepak Chopra and like modern
not
hacks. Yeah.
Deepak Chopra is like the used car salesman of his
Yeah.
A slick, greasy guy who's just in it for the money.
Yeah.
Steiner didn't care about money. He never had much money. They would just raise money for various projects, but he didn't care about it. He was the real deal.
Okay, so since you've had such an extensive critique of Christianity, and in some sense a bit of a Nietzschean approach that it's a thing of the past, and it's not going to return. So what I would like to do is I would like to from combining Jean Gebser with Peter Sloterdijk, I would like to make a steelman out of Christianity, like the best case for it, and then I would like you to deconstruct it, I guess. So I guess from Gebser's perspective, Christianity is in some sense integral because he sees Christianity as a fruitful combination of those consciousness structures. So, for example, Gebser would see mental consciousness structure in Christianity as, Jesus walks on water. He walks on the unconscious. And there is this part of the logos that is there to vaccinate people so that they don't get possessed from the demonic powers, I guess. So there's this individualistic part of you having a personal relationship with the God and being personally responsible for your sins and having free will. So there's this mental part that Gebser speaks about in Christianity. Then there is this mythic part that Gebser recognizes in Christianity when he, in the middle of his book, he analyzes what he calls oceanic thinking, when he analyzes the pattern of the Gospel of John's first sentence about God being the Word and Word being with God, where it circles back to itself and creates this circle.
These are like mini consciousness structures, like stepping stones leading into the mental from the mythical. Yeah, he does a good job.
And then there's also the magic structure in Christianity, because we have Trinity, which in some sense doesn't conform to what Joseph Campbell in his first volume of Primitive Mythology says, Aristotelian logic, where something cannot be the same, where two things cannot be in the same sense and at the same time, where we have Trinity, which is not necessarily the most logically consistent concept. We also have this idea of Jesus being a human and a God at the same time, in the same sense. So it also has this magic aspect to it. So, for example, the transubstantiation, which is also a product of the magic consciousness structure, where when the wafer and the wine becomes the flesh and blood. So I guess that would be the Gebser's defense of it being this harmony of those consciousness structures. And then, to add to the cocktail, Peter Sloterdijk, from what I gathered from his first volume, Microspherology, the last chapter, he speaks about perichoresis, if you remember that. So basically, Sloterdijk believes that the concept of perichoresis, which explains how Trinity works, whereby all its hypostases are interconnected within one another, it in some sense allows us to understand how human interactions work, as opposed to hard sciences that do not. And on top of that, to add some, again, Peter Sloterdijk, he would say, I guess, that Christianity can act as an immune system pump for the Western civilization against the Islamic and Russian forces that try to swallow it up. So what would you say about this idea that Gebser's idea of it having all the consciousness structures within, Sloterdijk's idea that it's a good pump of the Western immune system? So yeah, I guess that's the overview that I do. Yeah,
that's interesting. I'm a little hazy on Bubbles, which is that volume of Microspherology, because it's been a while since I've read through it. I'm trying to recall those last chapters, but it's eluding me. I do want to go back through Sloterdijk, through my classroom, and take those 3 volumes of spheres. The first one on microspheres, the second one on macrospheres, which are civilizational immunes, and then foam. In the interview collection that I helped edit, that was put out by
Neither Sun Nor Death?
Neither Sun Nor Death, yeah. He lays out an interesting little paradigm that is kind of something that you can rub up against Gebser, because I don't get the feeling that he's ever read Gebser, where he says being meant being in the Heideggerian sense. Heidegger's fond of tracing being as physis and being as the Platonic forms, and being gets reinterpreted historically in all these different historical epochs. So he's sort of riffing off of Heidegger when he says that being in the world in the mythical phase of consciousness meant being in the body of the mother. You have, and this is his word, uteromorphic cosmologies, where you've got the flat Earth almost like an embryo floating in a uteromorphic amniotic ocean around it. That's the same thing as Gebser's mythical matriarchal consciousness structure, same exact thing. And then he says, when you get down to the Greeks, being becomes being in the mind of the father. So you get the rise of the patriarchal. Athena is born from the head of Zeus.
Yeah.
What I've called the paternal vulva, is something as a counter concept I invented against Lacan's phallus idea. But that's the next epoch of being that comes in. And then he says, by the time we get to modernity, now we're outside of both mother and father, and hence Heidegger's anxiety that he announces in Being and Time, because we're thrown, Heidegger's terminology, right? We're thrown out into the world unprotected by any metaphysical immune system. And now we've got foam. You're on your own. Each person is his own microsphere, all rubbing up against each other. He says the architectural equivalent of this is the skyrise apartment complex that looks like a bunch of cells, like monks' cells. That's what social foam is. That's what's happened after the collapse of our Christian macrosphere. Our macrosphere, though, wasn't just Christian. It was a combination of the classical macrosphere together with the Christian, and the whole Christian mentality during the time. And this is what Frances Yates writes about in her book Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic tradition, where they are reviving in the Renaissance with Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola. They're recovering all the texts that Greek monks who fled from the destruction of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks. They fled with all of these texts, including the Corpus Hermeticum, all the writings of Plato. The West had only had one or two treatises. They bring those in and they set about to translate them instantly and immediately, which leads to them and they found an academy and so forth, open a school, but it leads to a problem, that these men are all Christian. They're all good Christians, and they think of themselves that way. But now we've got these other traditions. We've got these pagan mythologies. We've got the Corpus Hermeticum, which is fairly Gnostic, basically, in its attitude. A lot of what it says in there undermines Christianity. For example, reincarnation is in the Corpus Hermeticum. Lots of great stuff. So they have to create a macrosphere that combines both of these. In England, this becomes John Dee. John Dee inherits this tradition. He's the first to bring it from the continent and import it into England during the Elizabethan period. So he brings this Christian Kabbalistic cosmology into England. He's a master of languages. He knows Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. He creates the whole canvas that Shakespeare and company presuppose for their cosmology. And then so that gets imported into England. But now James the First, when he comes in after Elizabeth, is a witch hunter. He's a witch hunter. So he's after people like this. Dee comes back from the continent. He goes there for a journey to Poland, to Austria, actually, where the Emperor Rudolf might have been the first or the second. He was into mystical things, like alchemy and the Hermetic tradition, and so he brought Dee in with Kelly. Kelly was a medium, and so they were talking to spirits and writing about it, talking to beings that they're calling angels. And so this is all together creating a Christian classical macrosphere that then is destroyed by the various revolutions of science, starting with Copernicus. With Copernicus, now we realize that we're in orbit around the sun. We get the geological revolution with Lyell and Hutton. No, the Earth wasn't made 4004 BC. It actually took billions of years, billions as it turns out, but they're on the right track. And so the cosmology keeps changing. Darwin comes in. oh, evolution moves by natural selection.
Yeah.
I wasn't made God. Okay, so one hammer blow against Christianity after the next from science until you get down to Nietzsche and he says, look what we've got here. It's rubble. Christianity is in ruins. God is dead. It's rubble. It has not survived the assault on its cosmology that it knew, which is why Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake, that it knew was a threat. And putting Galileo under house arrest, it knew very well that this was the enunciation of the end of Christianity. So the cosmology is gone. The world picture, the macrosphere part of it is gone. But spirituality is not, because spirituality exists beyond Christianity. It's a priori to any of the world religions. Each one of the world religions is a kind of software that's devised for interacting with the spirit world, the world that we cannot see, but that many of us at least know is there. So how do we communicate with it? Do we use mediums to communicate with these spirits and find out the truth? I've listened to mediums interview Jesus on YouTube. There's a channel on there, and they interview him. And it's interesting that the Jesus individuality, the things that he says about the Gospels, let's consider this for a second, just as a test case or a thought experiment. Jesus says, the Jesus character that they're interviewing says, 80% of the Gospels is false. 80% of what's in there is false. I was not born from a virgin mother. My mother was raped by a Roman soldier, which is odd because that is a tradition. It's in the beginning of Ulysses. It's referred to as Panthelius, the Roman soldier. That was his name. So he says it was the result of a rape. I was married to Mary Magdalene. We had children. I traveled around a lot. I went into Europe. Very different. If these are the, quote, facts that Christianity is reporting through the distorted mythological lens of the Gospels, then this is a very different version of the life of Jesus, the actual version of it. If it's correct, then what we're worshiping as dogma, and it's insisted that it's dogma, is not true. It's false. And then the priest's power, because it's all about getting power. When you create a dogma and you get together in a group to say, this is official, that's not, you do that out of fear that you don't have power. And now we're in a group, so now we have power. So therefore, we'll burn you at the stake if you disagree with us, because we are in possession of the truth. That's all a lie. It's an illusion that's designed to intimidate masses, organize them, put the fear of God into them. Lie after lie after lie after lie is what Christianity is. It's built on lies. There are cores of truth. There is such a thing as a soul, for instance, but it isn't invented with the body. It pre-exists the body because it's been through many, many lifetimes before this particular body. There is a God, some kind of creator being. Who knows what it is, but I can tell you this. I can tell you what it isn't. It's not some bearded rabbi on a throne somewhere that Michelangelo depicted throwing planets around. That's not what it is. That's a mask of God, as Joseph Campbell calls it, the masks of God. He has it, whatever it is, because it certainly isn't male or female. It's beyond those kind of biological gender divisions. Whatever. Angels, as it turns out, actually do exist. It just doesn't, you can call them whatever you want. Sri Aurobindo called them divas. They're just creator beings who are macrocosmic, and they create solar systems, stars, and galaxies, things like that. They carry out the wishes of the creator being. Steiner had, right, and Steiner extracts this from the core of Christianity. Steiner tries to reform Christianity. He like Gebser, wants to save it. And so he transforms it into his own kind of Gnostic version of Christianity. I, on the other hand, as much as I respect and admire these men, disagree. I think Christianity has to go. I don't think you can reform it.
Yeah.
Despite Steiner's valiant attempts to bring reincarnation and karma into it, I think it just needs to go. We need a newer religion that's up to date cosmologically, that's consistent with things like the Big Bang and evolution by natural selection. Although that's a naive thing, because Darwin thinks that mutations are random and accidental, and they are not. What they are is discarnate spirit beings who know that the Mozarts who know how to play the genetic keyboard coming in knowing that this organism if it needs to get from here to there, we need to alter the genes to create another mutation that will get us. That's what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Mutations are not random, which is why they appear so perfectly thought out when we encounter them. But go ahead. That was just my...
Yeah, I guess regarding that, I mean, I guess what Richard Dawkins would say to that is like, well, if there's someone who is pulling the strings from the behind, why don't they just create humankind out of nothing instead of nitpicking? It
doesn't work that way. There are steps that have to get to.
Yeah, but Richard Dawkins would tell you, like, why? Why do you need to take steps?
Listen, the brain is a tuning box. It tunes in frequencies of consciousness. So it needs to have certain layers added to it. You start with the reptilian brain, and that can only pick up the reptilian frequency and bring in reptilian souls onto the physical plane. Then you get the mammalian midbrain. Now we can bring in warm, furry, fuzzy, emotional animals that have attachment to their mother. So that's picking up on a different frequency. Then we have to get to those outer layers of the neocortex, which can now tune in to human consciousness, or what we would call human consciousness. Now they can incarnate into bodies where the brain can fully pick up the rational consciousness, the logos consciousness, if you want to call it that humans have. So you can't just do this ex nihilo. But you have to start with the bacteria, step by step. You start with individual cells, then multicellular organisms. It's a process that requires steps. And the spirits know this and realize that. They're patient. Believe me, they have all the time in the world. These spiritual beings do. They're not in any hurry. Dawkins is in a hurry. You're not. The spirits are not.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, the typical atheist outlook would suggest that, step-by-step approach is only compatible with a naturalistic worldview, and there's no place for it in a spiritualistic worldview, but I guess you would completely disagree with it. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so one thing, just to follow-up question on Christianity, you've said that there are lots of things in Christianity that is a lie. You've brought up the Jesus marrying Magdalene, this and that. So, then I'd naturally want to ask you, what then would you say about the esoteric exoteric distinction and the idea of the noble lie from the Platonic sense? Because from what I gather, you Oswald Spengler would call you a socialist in that sense. As Oswald Spengler has this concept of socialism, which he diagnoses a Western thinker with the idea that a socialist is not someone who's a leftist, but a socialist in the sense someone who spreads the truth, someone who thinks that if something is true, you ought to spread it, you ought to say it. There is no such thing as an esoteric exoteric distinction between this the secret elitist truths and the noble lies that you should tell to people. So I guess you would disagree with this elitist position that maybe, we know that there are some lies in religion, but we should let people believe in noble lies because because they wouldn't be able to comprehend all this complex stuff. But I guess you are very straightforward. You're like, this is a lie. This is true. This is the truth. This is garbage.
No, I'm glad you brought this up because it's an important distinction to make. That insofar as the world religions are orthodox, none of them agree with each other. The official theology of Judaism is at odds with the theology of Christianity officially. But insofar as they are heterodox, that is to say, move from exoteric to the esoteric tradition, they all can fuse together very easily, very nicely. That's what I was talking about with Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, as they discover that Jewish theology may be at odds with Christian theology, but Jewish mysticism is perfectly in sync with Christian alchemical mysticism. They fit together very well with the Kabbalah. So you have to go to the Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah, which has, instead of angels, it has Sephiroth. And the Sephiroth has the idea of the emanation from the Keter, the one, the absolute, whatever that is, that comes down, splits into Chokmah and Binah, two separate powers, wisdom and intelligence, and goes down all through. This is the light of the God being, coming down through creation until it gets to the earthly plane, Malkut, which is simply their symbol for the physical plane that we're on, the plane that's governed by 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water. That whole cosmology is perfectly compatible with the alchemical cosmology, with the Hermetic cosmology, and that's why this is known as the perennial tradition. It's exactly the same cosmology as in India, the official cosmology there, not the esoteric one, because the official cosmology is all about the world as we get it in the Upanishads. The world is an illusion, Maya, that's Melkit, same thing. It's an illusion that's concealing a single one reality. That's Keter, the one at the top, which is also Plotinus's one, and his emanations downward. The one moves to the mind, the nous, which moves to the anima mundi, the cosmic soul of the planets. That's where astrology applies. Then down to the earth, the material plane. These are the same cosmologies. Maya conceals Brahman. Brahman is the ultimate one reality, the cosmic energy that powers all things, and it is Sat, Chit, Ananda. According to Sri Aurobindo, who's sort of reforming the Indian tradition, Sat is consciousness, just being there, existing. And Chit is consciousness, because Chitta is consciousness, and it's constantly moving, and it takes on the shapes of the forms that you see through your senses. So that's Chitta. And then Ananda is simply rapture, ecstasy. This is a being that is in a state of ecstasy, and as it creates, it is an ecstatic creation. What we see is suffering. What Schopenhauer sees, let's say, is suffering, pain, desires that we can't seem to fulfill, people dying in horrible ways. That's what it looks like over here. Over there, it's a different story. It's the rapture of creation and destruction, the dance of Shiva, creating forms and destroying them, and it's rooted in rapture. Because after all, these are just temporary bodies. Once we're rid of them, we're free, we're still in existence, and we will remain in existence for eternity. But we're part of an alchemical experiment. Each soul is sent down onto the earthly plane or the physical plane. It doesn't have to be Earth, it could be other planets, to purify it so that it can master the cosmic virtues like compassion. Love is the most important of them, and various kinds of specific virtues like persistence through adversity. Okay, you need to master that. Your soul needs to master that. We need to invent a body that's going to have a rough life for you to master that. And that an agreement is made. Okay, I know it's going to be rough, but I want it to be rough. Otherwise, I'm not going to learn how to master that virtue. And there are various different kinds of cosmic virtues that we're sent down to master, and that's why it's an alchemical process. The soul is gradually put through these transformations, just as the alchemist takes metal, puts it into the retort, and melts it down. You got to apply heat to it in order to melt it down and transform it into the gold. And the gold is the eventual creation of the perfect or perfected soul that now no longer has to incarnate. And now it becomes a guide. Ideally, anyway. Not everyone probably does, but then it becomes a guide. And then so the guide's process is to shepherd a group of souls. Steiner was the first to say this back in the 1910s, incarnate in groups. We actually do. This was found out by the hypnotherapist Michael Newton in his book, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. He got all this cosmology by putting his patients under regressive hypnosis. And so the whole process is this alchemical process of bringing the soul to perfection. With a group, could be 20 people, could be 5. The number varies. You're all switching roles. It's like a play, and the guide is like director of the play. This time you're going to play father. This time you're going to play the enemy. This time you're going to play the brother. So we switch roles. We've got a new cast, and we come down and we see what we do. And there has to be a memory one. That's one of the questions that you might ask here. Why, if all of this is set up for us and agreed to, all this planning, how come we can't remember it? Wouldn't it help us? Actually, it would not. If you had access to all of your past lives, you're going to spend too much time dwelling on the past. Yeah. And resorting to solutions that didn't work then, so they're not going to work now. They want you to forget, to have a clean slate, to develop from where your intrinsic powers have already been into your unconscious anyway. Those can be phobias. Phobias are sort of past life memories. They can be skills. A soul that has a tendency toward leadership will retain that, no matter whether it's as a soldier or leadership in writing or wherever it is. The soul will retain that quality because it's mastered it. So you see how this process is. It's a very complicated process of perfecting the soul by putting it through all these different lifetimes. This is going on in other planets as well, not just the Earth. But the Earth has the reputation for being the toughest planet in the Milky Way to incarnate on, therefore the most popular. It's the K2. If you want spiritual muscles, you need resistance. You can live an easy life, like celebrities do. Let's say you can say, oh, they get everything they want. How come they get all the money, all the sex, all the power? It's because they're on vacations.
Yeah.
They've had several tough lives in a row, and now they want an easy one just to take a break. That's what a celebrity is. We all do that.
Yeah.
Trust me. At some point, we all want to take a break. And so that's what celebrities are. They're taking a break. But the downside of being a celebrity is that an easy life doesn't do much for your spiritual development. It really doesn't. It's the tough ones that develop you and move you along to where the spirits want you to go, to get to. So we need the rough ones for that. But we all do both. As the psychologist Brian Weiss says, he's another one of these hypnotherapist guys, we've all been murderers, we've all been murdered. There's no sense pointing any fingers. We've all played the hammer, we've all played the anvil, to use Spengler's metaphor.
Yeah, I guess I will definitely ask you about the metaphysical system that you've constructed and researched it. I even remember you saying that even the sex drive that is so high, the reason for it is because, ghosts want to find the vehicles, and as much as you construct them, since
souls want to get down here. What I was saying was that there's never enough physical bodies down here to accommodate the number of souls who want to get down here. It's highly coveted. That's why you can find a soul that will hop into any body. If it's going to be a starving child in Ethiopia, you can find a soul who's willing to jump down in that body. I guarantee it. I'll covet it.
Yeah,
that's why the sex drive is.
Yeah, I have some questions prepared for you regarding your metaphysical understanding of how this whole existence works, but before that, before we move on, I just want to press you a little bit more on Christianity part and annoy you a little bit more. So, what would you say to a person who just says that? Just forget about what's true and what's not. Just a person who says that, well, for now we need Christianity for Western civilization to preserve itself, so that it can reawaken its immune system against the invading forces of, let's say, Islam and Russia and so on and so forth. What would you say? What if the approach toward Christianity is more of a pragmatic?
You're talking about it in terms of a metaphysical immune system.
Yeah.
As Sloterdijk would say.
Yeah, exactly. A macrosphere.
Yeah. There's truth to that. I'm not going to deny that. There is truth that it can act as a metaphysical immune system because it.
You cut off, I think.
Or.
So the voice.
Because we have a tradition of
you cut off, I think. It was so you were speaking about the immune systems and then the voice. So please just.
I was just saying that it can work as a metaphysical immune because we put 1,000 or 2,000, if you want to trace it back to Christ, years of intellectual thought into identifying ourselves as this religion, as this way of looking out on the world. However, yeah, maybe, but also other thoughts can work just as well as Christianity. It doesn't have to be Christianity. After all, I'm not Christian, but I'm thoroughly Western. I can tell you that. My heroes are all Westerns. Leonardo, Goethe, Raphael, Rembrandt, Mozart. Oh, hell yeah, I'm Western. You better believe it. So although I'm not Western in the sense of seeing myself as a Christian, but I identify with a tradition of intellectual development that descends from these masters, beginning with, I don't know, Dante perhaps, and going all the way down. So you can identify with it that way, and that forms a perfectly good immune system right there, a cultural immune system that doesn't necessarily require a religion for it to work as a kind of distance against Islam. We are not Islamic. We are never going to integrate Islam. It's not part of our tradition. They have a different history. They have a wonderful history, by the way. I'm very much a fan of Islam, the beauty of that religion. I've studied its philosophy and its art, its transformations over time are just as fascinating as the West. Absolutely they are. It's not the same civilization, though, simply because of the tradition. The past, it plays almost the defining role in defining one culture versus another. Well, what is that culture's past? That in itself, you lay down a path in walking. As you're walking, you're creating the past. You're creating the path of the past as a civilization is moving over time. So that's how I would answer.
Yeah. So I guess since you mentioned the history of Western civilization along how it evolved, how it co-evolved with Christian outlook. So I would like to explore Peter Sloterdijk's early approach to it, namely if we apply his the essay that he wrote, the Rules for the Human Zoo, which became pretty controversial. So I guess one case that could be made from Sloterdijk's more of a like an anthropotechnological approach is that basically Christianity in the West, what it did is that it bred a more of a self-tamed, domesticated people out of more, let's say, brutish Viking Germanic tribes, because if we look at it from Leonard Schleyn's perspective, I remember Leonard Schleyn speaking in his book Alphabet versus Goddess that monastic practices they specifically engineered very specific type of men who were able to, train and exercise their prefrontal cortexes so that they could completely subjugate their bodies. No sex, never looking at a woman, no jokes, always looking down, reading texts, being celibate. So then I guess Peter Sloterdijk would say that so, for example, in Germany and in German language, there is this word, this concept that is named Sitzfleisch, which means sitting flesh. So this is the idea that German people have this ability to sit down whole day, 9 hours, 8 hours, and subjugate their motor system, their impulses, and dedicate their mind to one particular thing, the sitting flesh, I guess. So what would you say about this idea that what Christianity did to Europe is that it selected and bred more of a domesticated, tamed this type of people who transformed their physicality into the world of the mental, physical war into the mental war. And I guess I can even add to the cocktail Friedrich Nietzsche's essay, which is Homer's Contest, when he speaks about this idea that our bestial nature isn't gone in any way, shape, or form. It's just transmutated into the mental war, into the mental contest. So
there's certainly something to that. Yeah, Lewis Mumford, who's an American writer, thinker, philosopher, writes about this in Technics and Civilization, and also later on in his later book, The Myth of the Machine, where he's talking about the birth of the monastery and the monastic ideal that comes in around the 6th century, 550 maybe, with Saint Benedict. And they regulate the hours of the day, so you have 8 distinct hours, and you have the different canonical ringing of the bells for Vespers and whatever the canonical hours were. I've forgotten them. But and then the mechanical clock comes into being so that they will be on time for their prayers. They didn't have dials on them. They were meant to be heard at first. Dials were only added later. But it does start the laying down of what will later become the industrial society, right? The 9-to-5 society, where the work ethic, and all these monks have to put in a certain number of hours of work a day. I think it's 4. At least a minimum of 4, possibly 6, that they're required to work on something. It doesn't matter what. As cultivating a garden, writing a book, whatever, just get busy. So that does lay down the Faustian West work ethic. Whereas the Vikings are just marauders. They don't have any kind of organization, just going around raping, pillaging, marauding. They're in it for themselves. They're not interested in a society. The Vikings may have a kind of culture, but they don't have a society. And the monks did, with Christianity, organize a society. Just as you're saying, it was a civilizing principle. I'm not against religions, because I don't think that you can build a civilization without one. Every single one of these civilizations, going all the way back to ancient Sumer and ancient Egypt, you have to have a religion to bring a civilization into being that has an symbol with a unique identity. None of that will happen without a religion. So it's absolutely essential. But I think there comes a time when the society can outgrow the religion and shed it like a pseudomorphosis and say, no longer need it.
I was definitely planning to touch on the concept of pseudomorphosis, but on top of that, I guess it reminds me of Umberto Eco's work, A Name of the Rose, where basically there's this like on top of the working hours. Wouldn't you agree that there was this practice of that hypertrophied Western society's prefrontal cortex, in the sense that, so for example, in Umberto Eco's work, you have this plot whereby they are not letting Aristotle's lost work on comedy to be revealed, because laughing is forbidden in monastic lifestyle. It's as if Christianity,
they're editing out the fun parts of life. Comedy and sex are two of the funnest parts of life, and I think they are fundamentally spiritual things, because our natural default mode is well-being, and these are modes of well-being, and that is what we're trying to get to, well-being, in satisfying these. So I reject Christianity's rejection of fun, like the movie.
I guess Jesus never laughs himself, right?
They can't do any dancing in the town. Why not? It's fun. It's Dionysian. The Greeks had no problem with it. They would bring out huge phalluses during the Dionysian festivals, where they would put on all the plays of Sophocles and Aeschylus for competition. Everyone would get drunk. They would laugh at the giant phalluses that were being carried down the aisles. They were having a good time with it. Doesn't look to me like there was any problem with sexuality there, with seeing it as fundamentally spiritual too. It's just a different mode. It's the Dionysian mode of spirituality, not the Apollonian. You can think of the human organism in terms of the chakras. You got the chakras here, starting at the top with the Sahasrara chakra, and then going down to the Agya chakra, which this is the chakra of unity, Keter, plus minus is 1, so forth. And the Agya chakra is that which sees into the astral plane, so you can see the gods and spirits and so forth. And then the throat chakra, Vishuddha, which is the chakra of communication. Mercury rules it. Then you've got the heart chakra, which is the chakra of compassion and warmth and emotion. And then those lower chakras, which are so troublesome. The Manipura chakra at the belly, which is all about the will to power over others. Then you have the genitals, the Svadhisthana chakra, which is all about sex, and the Muladhara chakra, which is all the lowest of any of the virtues, sort of inverted upside down. But you can take that like a staff, turn it on its side, that model, and you've got Apollo over here at one end with the head, and Dionysus at the other end with the genitals. Those two need to be in balance. That's the whole reality of it. They need to be in balance, not this way with Apollo at the top and the Svadhisthana genitals at the bottom. They need to be in balance, like the scales of Libra. That's the ideal. For me, that's the ultimate ideal of spirituality. Their chakras are balanced. And by the way, chakras are not just a New Age bullshit metaphor. They're actually real. I've seen a man's chakras under the influence of psilocybin as I was coming off a very bad psilocybin trip that was no fun at all. And but as I was coming off it and I was seeing everything normally, there was another kid across the way there that was also having a bad trip, and he had a couple of shamans around him. And as I leaned over their shoulders, I see iridescent in and out of focus, disappearing, absolutely luminous and beautiful.
You cut off when you said, I'm leaning over the shoulder. That's when you cut off. I was leaning over the shoulder.
I was leaning over the shoulders of the shamans who were trying to help this kid. I looked down and I could see his chakras. They were beautiful. They were iridescent. They were gleaming in and out of focus like this. And then when he stood up, it was weird because we must have been tuned to the same exact frequency. It's possible we were both having Saturn-Pluto transits because he was the only one that I could, when he would stand up and we would look at each other, I could see through his skull, like with this X-ray vision, as though it was shining an X-ray light like they use in the movie AI to identify robots with. It was exactly like that. It was totally, it was wild. So they're not metaphors. We have actual chakras, and the whole point of having them is getting them all balanced, not letting one or the other chakra rule you.
Yeah,
and so again, notice that's pretty much the same thing as the integral consciousness.
Transparency, right?
Yeah, the transparency and the balance, the integration of all the chakras, the integration of all the consciousness centers in Gebser.
And I guess, if I guess one question that Spengler would have asked you, listening to that, would say, well, do you apply this philosophy to everybody, the balance? Because Spengler would say that that's a socialistic approach. Does that balance, this idea that Dionysian and the Apollonian should be balanced, does it apply to, let's say, Nietzsche's philosopher kings, intellectuals only, or do you apply to everyone?
No. Ideally, it should be applied to everyone, but because everyone is on different karmic missions, one guy's karma may have been that he wants to be a warrior. He wants to be a Viking, and he incarnates specifically to have that Manipura chakra power chakra activated over all of his other chakras, because that's his. Fulfill that. After he's done with that, he'll move on to other chakras. So no, it depends on what the individual karmic mission is, you might say.
Okay. So I guess so since you mentioned the idea that Europe and Western civilization
they get balanced over, by the way, they get balanced over time naturally through the incarnational process. You're going to experience all the chakras, lifetimes in which one or the other will be emphasized until you get to the ones where they're in balance. Go ahead. I'll just amend that.
Yeah. Since you So basically, since you mentioned the idea that Western civilization is not just Christian, I think it's the right opportunity for me to ask you some questions about Oswald Spengler, which is one of your favorite authors. So Oswald Spengler, so here's the thing, right? One problem that I've had with Jordan Peterson and those guys is that they would always explain the essence and the core of Western civilization in terms of Judeo-Christian heritage. Now, if Jordan Peterson and his associates are doing it because for the purposes of appealing to the masses, that's okay. But if he truly believes that West is just a product of Judeo-Christian values, then that's really a very poor analysis. Since Oswald Spengler, I guess, makes it clear that it's not that it's Christianity, but rather Faustian spirit applied Christianity as it wanted to apply it. It basically, a Faustian spirit changed Christianity to fit its clothes, to fit its shape. I've just, it's been like 8 days since I've arrived in Austria, Vienna. It's my first time in being Europe as an international student. And so, when I arrived in Vienna, I was completely sleep deprived, like I guess 2 days of sleep deprivation, and I couldn't sleep. I couldn't wait till I could see a Gothic cathedral, from which I'd read about Gothic cathedrals. I would watch movies. I would watch videos. Obviously, I was very interested to see it in real life, since Oswald Spengler believes that Gothic cathedral is basically the best visual symbol of Western civilization, as this a rocket that tries to go into the infinite space and completely break the barriers. So there's this in Vienna. The most famous and the biggest one is St. Stephen's Cathedral, and the way you go there is by you go up by an escalator. So I'm sleep deprived. I go there, and then I go up via an escalator, and I slowly start to see this magnificence. It's my first time, and of course I was completely dumbfounded. Like I could not even say a word. I was stunned. I'm looking at it, a couple of minutes pass, I start to gather myself, and I look at it and I'm like, well, yeah, Spengler's own point. Yeah, that's it. That's a rocket. That's it. It's just soaring upward. It wants to go into the infinite space. It wants to break all the barriers, and especially when you look at the Gothic cathedral from the angle where the arches, where they make this triangle, it's like, it's as if it's going to take off. It's as if there's one step from Gothic cathedral to Elon Musk's rockets, I guess. So that's not Christian. That's not Christian at all. Christianity, as Oswald Spengler would say, it's Magian, it's cavernous, right?
It's the dome. It denies verticality. That's the Earth symbol of the Magian civilization, and Spengler identifies the Magian civilization as Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Persian, Byzantine. Mm-hmm. So those 5 different societies all comprise the Magian, and they're all about the group, the basic consensus mentality. In our group of Manichaeans, let's say, we believe these doctrines, virtues. Mm-hmm. The West isn't like that. It's about the individual, lost in infinite space, which is why we have the loneliest characters in the history of literature. Hamlet, Parzival, Don Quixote, Faust, all the way down to The Godfather with Michael Corleone and Luke Skywalker. These are the loneliest heroes in the history of literature for exactly that reason, because the individual is like a miniature cathedral unto himself, infinitely fascinating, infinitely unique. And yeah, when you walk into that cathedral and you have that experience and you realize these are the people who are going to go to the moon.
Exactly.
Everything's pointing up. That's where we're going.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an Earth symbol that has completely transformed and disintegrated the Magian Earth symbol. So that's why Spengler thinks of them as 2 completely different civilizations. It's not 2,000 years of Christianity. It's 1,000 of Magian and 1,000 of Faustian. And the Faustian is wearing the outer garments of Christianity.
Pseudomorphosis, right. Yeah.
The inner soul is completely incompatible with its doctrines. That's why it too was also inevitable that it would break it apart with that Faustian expansion to infinite space. Because that's what happened. We destroyed the cavern with Copernicus starting there. Galileo, Kepler, Tycho Brahe and company, they completely dismantled the closed macrosphere, the closed universe, from the closed to the absolutely infinitely open macrosphere. We've even got Giordano Bruno saying, this isn't the only solar system. There's jillions of solar systems out there. I guarantee you there's an infinity of worlds. He turned out to be correct. The church was wrong. So yeah, the whole thing can be seen as a battle against the Christian pseudomorphosis upheld by the priests and the theologians and the true inward soul of the Faustian West, which is fundamentally Promethean and rebellious against all authorities. That's our tradition. That's what makes us Faustian, not Christianity. Rebellion against authority and the emphasis on individual critical thinking. Mm-hmm. That's Faustian right there.
Exactly.
That's the mark. There's nothing to do with Christianity.
Yeah.
So that's why I was making that point that I don't think it's necessary to have Christianity as an immune system. We've got an inner Faustian immune system that's built into our Promethean rebellious mentality.
Yeah. When I have to explain what Faustian concept means to my friends, I always contrast it with Chinese epic Journey to the West, where there's this scene that when I read the book, there's this scene that I
You're breaking up, Nicholas.
Yeah.
You're
sorry.
breaking up.
Okay.
All hashy.
Okay, I'll come close to the mic. So basically,
Give
what I
it a
was.
second to.
Okay.
Okay, I know you have another camera, but I was talking about the sound.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So basically, what I was saying is that every time I have to explain the Spengler's concept of Faustian to my friends, or speaking about it in my videos, I frequently contrasted Chinese epic Journey to the West, and in that book, which when I read it, there was one scene that itched into my brain, and it has that's when so when the Wukong, the monkey, is into the when he is constrained in the heavens, and when he escapes and meets Buddha. And when he meets Buddha, then Buddha challenges him. It's like, can you make a backflip and go into the to the extremes of the universe and come back. And so Wukong's like, of course I can. So he does the backflip. He goes down. He sees the pink pillars of the universe that holds the existence itself. He pisses on it with his name, and he jumps back. And Buddha is like, oh, well, look at my hand. Your name is, yeah, you didn't even left my palm.
The pink pillars.
Yeah. And
yeah, good contrast.
And then there is this thing that Wukong, who is a Faustian character in the Chinese epic, who wants to master the 72 ways and have this infinite power, he's a problem. He's not a hero. He's a problem to be solved. And they manufacture this sort of helmet. So, Skinner's behavior is sort of helmet with which they subjugate.
Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, Clockwork Orange. And basically they subjugate Wukong to the metaphysical goal of fetching the Tripitaka. And this is a very good, I guess, the contrast of that the Faustian rebellious character is a problem for this, not the hero. Whereas for the West, and we can even,
Monkey corresponds to a Western hero. Rebellion. He's running around making fun of the gods, stealing the scepter from the Dragon Kings, disrupting everything. That's exactly how the Chinese perceive us, as children's messing up the social authority by questioning it. So you got to put a cap on it so that he'll behave. So you're absolutely correct that's a good contrast between the two different Ursuls, you might say, of the two different societies. How the individual is regarded. The other I would add in contrasting Asia with the West is these two archetypes that I call the Wonderchild versus the Elders.
Uh-huh.
And so with the West, you get, for some strange metaphysical reason that I can't explain, I don't think Spengler could either, this gradual aging backwards of our gods.
The Benjamin Button thing that
We start with Yahweh, and then we move to Christ, and then we've got the little infant unmarried. That, starting with the Minoans. The Minoans are the first ones to paint the Wonderchild on their walls because the princes don't have beards. They still have beards. These people don't. So that starts it, and then the Greeks inherit it with the Kouros statue, the boy wonder. It's a grave marker, but it becomes the basic prototype for their whole sculptural tradition. They don't sculpt old men. Our 19th century, which is the Hellenistic period of Hellenistic art, and there are no longer rules. You can sculpt an old woman, sculpt an old man, sculpt a degeneration from their archetype. And in literature, with Achilles is the first Wonderchild there, because it opens up where they're not just fighting over a slave, Agamemnon, the older grizzled warrior, and Achilles. It's the youth, the older generation, because as Achilles saw,
you're cutting off. I think you're cutting off. It's when you the internet. It's when you were speaking about the Achilles versus the Agamemnon, as in the young generation.
Okay, I'll start there again.
Yeah.
So in the Iliad, you have Achilles is the first Wonderchild there. He's the youngest, must be around 22, 23, because he doesn't remember he wasn't old enough when they made an oath to go rescue Helen if ever she was abducted. He's too young for that. Also, Carolyn Alexander writes a book about this, The War That Killed Achilles, where she says is not present in most of the book. He must have been a character that was added later on, because he's not intrinsic to the plot at all. So he's an add-on, this Wonderchild archetype, and he's in a fight with the old grizzled warrior Agamemnon. And every decision Agamemnon makes leads to disaster. So this is the Greeks rejecting the way of the elders and favoring the kid, because the kid has the new ideas that will save us. That goes all the way down through the Greeks. We inherit that. It goes all the way down to Steve Jobs in his garage, the Wonderchild inventing the new. That's what the West wants. It has, for some reason, maybe it's karmic, but it has this tendency to want new, innovation. The Asian mentality is the exact opposite. If you read Confucius's Analects, he's talking about you have to have respect for your elders.
Uh-huh.
You can be put in jail if you don't take care of your grandparents, and you put them elsewhere, as we do in the West, you can be put in jail or even executed. And all their archetypes are Lao Tzu guys with long beards. They don't have young men anywhere in their art. The only young creatures they have are women, for obvious reasons, but not men. The old guy is the guy who has wisdom, the elder. And so they're conservative. It's a fundamentally conservative civilization that does not like change, does not like innovation. It has had them, as Joseph Needham points out, in Science and Civilization in China. They do have innovations, but they're far and few in between. It's because we've got a 3,000-year history there for China, at least. They are still using, by the 6th century BC, the time of the Socratic philosophers in the West, they're still using farming equipment that's from the Bronze Age, that's outdated and old, a lot of wooden digging implements and so forth. They didn't even have irrigation until then. So they were very slow to adapt to all of these kinds of changes. And the voyages, the guy in the book, 1421, I think, who makes all these voyages into the Pacific Ocean, may even have discovered America. But we don't know, because when he came back, Zheng Ha was his name, when he came back, there had been a change of emperors. And a new emperor came in and says, these voyages never happened. We're going to burn all the maps and notes. It never happened. And China's always like that. It goes back and forth. It might have a new thing, and then it'll have a sting of conscience about it and say, no, the elders wouldn't want that. It's a problem with the Chinese mentality, that back and forth.
Could you please elaborate on and also add the factor of the how those cultures have a different type of the day of disease? As in, you've also explored the idea that Halloween is the shortest day of the deceased when it comes to the West, but the other cultures, their day of the deceased, it's far more, it's longer, it's more nuanced, it's more important for them, and also you've also elaborated as far as I think I've read it. I don't remember whether I've read it in your book. You've said it. You said that there is this thing of Western horror being associated with finding out that there are your ancestors buried in your attic, in the downstairs, as in under your house. Poltergeist, yeah.
Poltergeist. That's the absolute horror. Whereas that was the norm during the entire Neolithic period, burying their dead under their house floors where they're sleeping. So they're sleeping right above the graves at sites like Çatalhöyük, which is 6500 BC. And sites previous to that at Muraybet, even with the Natufians, although with the Natufians, who are the first to come in the Mesolithic about 12,000 BC, they invent agriculture, but they had a tradition where they would, if someone died, they would bury them into the house floor and then abandon the house and move to another house. But the norm is burial under the living quarters all the way through until you get to about the time a little before this, well, it's the pottery Neolithic, which comes in 6500 BC and lasts till 5300 BC. And it's during the pottery Neolithic, this is when we get what Mary Sedegast used to call pyrotechnologies, new double-chambered kilns that can fire pottery at higher temperatures and therefore make better pottery, but also cremation of the dead now comes in for the first time with these pyrotechnologies. This originates out of the Sinjar Mountains in northern Iraq. That's where cremation comes from. It used to be thought it was invented by the Indo-Aryans, but this is before the Indo-Aryans, 6500 BC. So it came out of the mountains in northern Iraq. And so they also stopped burying their dead under their houses when they do have inhumation, and because not everybody was doing cremation, but the ones who weren't created separate cemeteries now for the first time at a village called Yaram Tepe, which is in those Sinjar Mountains. They create the dead are over there now. There starts to become a separation ontologically and metaphysically between the living and the dead. And I believe that gap enabled the Sumerian city-states to come into existence because now they no longer put the elders first because the elders will always say no. It's their job to guard the original archai of the civilization that brought it into being. That archai, as in China, was sufficient. We don't need more archai. That's why we have these archives. We don't need new ones. And so the elders' job is to guard those archives. But now what happens with the Sumerians and what enables them to bring in the incredibly innovative idea of the first civilization made up out of these individual city-states is that they take the cult of the revered dead and transform it into gods. And each one of the gods is a patron of a specific technology. Enki is the patron of irrigation, for instance. Nanisine, the moon boat god, is the patron god for the making of boats, which are all shaped in crescents. And there's a spider goddess who is the mistress of weaving. Inanna is the mistress of astronomy. She's associated with the planet Venus, and so on. As you go down the line, each god has a separate craft that it's associated with. So now, plus, they're all associated with the stars and planets as well. So they're looking up at the stars and planets, and they're creating an idea of thy will be done as above, so below, the Hermetic axiom. And that was what the whole idea was. But my thesis was, in my book, The Wonderchild versus the Elders, was that as this evolves and civilization evolves into the West, the Day of the Dead gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Aryans have a Day of the Dead every month. The Kishbu festival, well, they'll set out, if they have somebody who's dead at the dinner table, they'll set a place for them.
Kishbu.
So they do that once a month. When you get to the Greeks, they have only 3 festivals for the dead. The Anthesterion, which lasts, I forget how long, maybe it's a week or so. The Anthesterion in the springtime. And then there's 2 others. But they have 3 of them, and they're at least a week long each. But by the time you get to the West, we just have Halloween. There's nothing special about it. It's for kids.
And you have to guard off the ancestors by pumpkins. You have to guard. You have to get rid of them.
Yeah, with the pumpkins, and here along come the kids. So let's reward them. Let's reward the kids with these treats. Back in the day, you would have sacrificed your best goat to give to the elders, not the kids. So it gets reduced, so that the West has no. Even the in Mexico, their Day of the Dead is still they're still closely tied to the dead, because they, on their version of the Day of the Dead, go to visit the graves of their dead, and they hold a little vigil there over the grave of the dead. We don't want anything to do with graveyards in Anglo-Saxon society. That's the horror of the movie Poltergeist. Finding out that the houses are built on top of a cemetery, it's like the worst thing that could ever happen to these people. So there has been a gradual separation from the realm of the dead. Erwin Roda was a friend of Nietzsche, and he wrote a book called Psyche, where he's the first to notice this about the Greeks, where right there the Greeks are sundering themselves from the underworld, because the Mycenaeans, or basically the Proto-Greeks, have the burial tholoi. They're dome-shaped. They've inherited the dome architecture, and they'll put the dead warrior in there and leave it open so that you can go in and put offerings to the dead warrior, because it presupposes that the warrior is going to use these implements in the afterlife. So there's still a close connection to the afterlife. But by the time you get to the Greeks, when the Dorians come down in and they bring cremation, they're burning the dead because they're severing their ties to the underworld. That's why when Homer goes down there, the underworld is dark. It wasn't dark for the Egyptians. The underworld was lit up very brightly. It was essentially their clearing, to use a Heideggerian term, the clearing space in which truths are made evident in the underworld for the Egyptians. But for Homer, it's full of twittering shades who are ineffectual and pathetic. So you can see the West's gradual diminution. The Hebrews just call it Sheol, and they want nothing to do with it. You throw the dead into a cave, and you don't go back and visit them. They're also rejecting the afterlife. So the West has gradually sundered its connections from the astral plane.
Yeah. So, keeping on with this Spengler's culture concept, one debate that I frequently have, especially with people who come from a more of a social constructivist leftist perspective, is that they are all so when I speak to them, they're frequently dissatisfied when I treat a culture as an organism, when it has its start point and its end point, in the sense of, when I say organism, I mean in the sense that, let's say, West having something universal and something binding in its Charlemagne's phase, up to its Enlightenment phase, up to its American phase, meaning that they frequently dislike this idea of treating West as if there is something continuous about it. From Charlemagne's period. And I guess most of the scholars believe that the West, as we know, is that the Western culture began and became special after the technological revolution, beginning with, I guess, Gutenberg up to the up to the Industrial Revolution. However, just reading the epics, the Song to the Nibelungs, Beowulf, Song to Roland, this and that, so for one of my favorites is the Nibelung, you have this sense that no, I mean, these people have this individualistic agenda already set up. So, for example, this one of the most fascinating stories for me is this, how Siegfried has to tame Brunhild, who lives there on the island, how he has to subjugate this feminine force and make her marry Gunther. For example, looking at Beowulf, it begins by telling the story about Schildscheffing, who made himself. He just inherits something. So this individualism, this myth of creating something out of nothing, it is there in the early period of Western civilization. Even we can connect the Buddha's palm to the global surveillance of China today, that there is this morphological connection. So what would you say about this idea that there is something about culture that it is there, irrespective of its phase?
Yeah, it's like a mysterious process that just comes into being. And you're right about these individuals, but with Beowulf, I did a YouTube series on Beowulf. There's a lot of wonderful ironies there, because it may have to do with the fact that the writer is a Christian who still remembers all the tales, but he's constantly subtly introducing things that indicate that Beowulf's Viking individualism leads to ruin. He has no offspring, for example, and the Yeots, which are his tribe, become extinct after him. He's always in it for himself, Beowulf. He kills the dragon. He's in it for himself. So there's a criticism there of the Viking mentality. There is also, too, in the Song of Roland. That's also the whole point of the Song of Roland is there's a criticism there, too, that what Roland has done that has led to disaster is because he wants to do all this himself. And he tells the rest of the troop, go away. And he's just got his sidekick there. So the individualism is there, but note that it's already in tension. There's already a tension between the individual and the social formation, the group in those epics. But I would say, too, though, with respect to those who don't agree that civilization is an organism, it's better if you use the word superorganism, because it isn't just an organism. It's a large collectivity that is able to organize itself the same way as ants do. They organize themselves around their symbol, which is the queen. That's their symbol. And that's what organizes the entire ant world there, or a colony of bees. It's organized because it's made up of individual components of bees that make up a bee superorganism that has a single collective intelligence. That's what Spengler means by Dasein. That's his use of the word Dasein, not Heidegger's. By being there is a metaphysical superconsciousness that's larger than the individual. It's a group consciousness that organizes it. Now, it could be that Rudolf Steiner says that there's a certain rank of angels, I think it's the archangels in his cosmology, that preside over civilizations. Each civilization has its own angel being that is in charge of it and organizes it. And he says that the West's was Gabriel. Gabriel has been, that's the equivalent of Mercury, communication, comes in right about the time of the invention of Gutenberg's invention of the printing press. He says about 1420. Gabriel comes in and takes charge. But then Gabriel is pushed out at the end of the 19th century, and the Archangel Michael comes in. It descends into the Earth's etheric consciousness. And now we're under a different... So note, too, that even with Steiner, as with Gebser and Spengler, they're identifying a major change, spiritual/cultural, at the tail end of the 19th century there. They all see it with different epistemological lenses, but they do see it. So the Archangel Michael, his mission is to re-spiritualize the materialism of the Gabrielic age, because that was all leading toward materialism. and it was doing so teleologically. It was on purpose. But Michael's task is to take that materialism and transubstantiate it, turn it into a spiritual paradigm. Pretty much the same thing as Spengler's second religiousness and Gebser's integral consciousness structures. So these guys are all agreeing and don't realize it. It takes an outsider like me, an American, and an American from the South way over to the Southwest, about as far and remote as you could get from the epicenter of Western civilization, to notice these things. Because these guys are too close to each other to see it. They're too busy fighting each other with their own paradigms. Someone wrote Jung a letter once asking, what's your opinion of Rudolf Steiner? And he wrote back, I have not the slightest use for him. That's, and then Steiner gives a lecture series taking apart Decline of the West. He just pulls it to pieces. Steiner makes all these errors, Spengler rather makes all these errors here, where he's got all these polarities when the situation is more complicated than just a series of polarities like Bachsein, Dasein, world is nature, world is history. Yeah. He thinks too simplistic. I think that's the beauty of Spengler, though. Those polarities really it sets up a difference engine there that gives the narrative tension, and it's wonderful as you read Decline of the West to see the polarity keeps transforming. It keeps turning into a different set of polarities. At the beginning of Volume 2, it becomes Bachsein, Dasein, which is his transformation of Apollo and Dionysus. Dionysus is the same thing.
The waking consciousness thing and the...
Yeah, Bachsein, waking consciousness is Apollo, basically. So he transforms Nietzsche there because he's been reading Bergson, and he brings in Bergson's creative elan vital, and fascinating how he does. Spengler was an artist, a knowledge artist. My mentor, William Irwin Thompson, coined this German term, Wissenskunst, knowledge as an art form, and it has since been taken up into the German language. So that's what Spengler is. That's what all these guys are. They're knowledge artists.
Yeah. One thing that I really would want to clear out and I guess clarify, because it's too vague for me, because to this day I'm still unable to pin that down, and I guess you might know it better, is Spengler's vague theory regarding how prime symbols emerge. So, for example, when it comes to to those who do not know, for Spengler, the prime symbol of the Western civilization is the infinite space, as the West tries to break all the barriers and go beyond with its railways and long distance weapons and so on and so forth, with Gothic cathedrals. And Spengler goes on to say that it emerged through, I guess, geography and the primeval forest. And he also goes into this, at least for me, was pretty vague. He goes into analyzing trees that are specific to the West, like beech trees, oaks, lindens, ash trees. And then he contrasted it with like Greek pine trees, and how pine tree creates more of a Euclidean sense of the space, and how ash trees are. And I don't really get it. So, what's the catch here? Like, how...
Analogy. It sounds like what you're trying to get at. The Earth symbol is basically his word for this particular civilization's entelechy.
Yeah.
It's entelechy. Okay, so what is it? Now, one of the things I've learned from my spiritual researches is that there's a being for each galaxy. Each galaxy has a being, a single being. You can call it an angel, whatever you want, that is in charge of the logos that organizes the incarnations in that galaxy. And ours is the logos is the fear versus love dichotomy. The challenge is bringing love down into a world where all the ground rules are set up against it. That's the theme that we're involved in. So there's one single being, a logos being, that's sort of immanent within the Milky Way. So it might be something analogous to that that the Earth symbol is actually the logos of a single being, an angel-type being. And this is what Steiner says with his folk spirits and with the different archangels that he assigns to the different civilizations. There may indeed be an organizing being that is in charge of that civilization and confers on it its particular quality of consciousness, which is any person who's born in Faustian civilization has to assume Faustian consciousness, which is that of the infinite space and the unique individual. It's an a priori given that we assume that as we come into this civilization. So I don't know. It is kind of murky mysticism, but I think there's some truth to it. That civilizations are organized by individual beings that are sort of collective super beings. Because there's no other way to explain it. How it's just presupposed that it's infinite space and that everything we create within that paradigm is infinite spatial. Until it begins to disintegrate at the end of the 19th century, and then you get Spengler sending up the alarm, firing the flare gun into the sky to signal that the West is sinking.
Yeah.
That's basically what the decline of the West is, but it's only the mental perspectival phase that's disintegrating.
Yeah, I mean, I remember Spengler quoting this tale where, like, Julius Caesar saying that, like, from Poland to space, from Poland to Spain, walked and there was no sunlight. That the forest was so heavy, but I still don't get the connection of how he specifically connects Europe's landscape to the infinite space.
Well, think of it in terms of when he's analyzing the different forms of the sciences and the dichotomy between them.
Yeah.
The Faustian is force versus mass.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Because if the lightning strikes in the forest, it's obvious that there's force versus mass.
Uh-huh.
Whereas in the Magian world, it's substance versus attribute.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they invent alchemy.
Yeah.
Basically, you're changing the attributes of an inherent substance there. And with the Greeks, with the Apollonian symbol there, it's simply the Euclidean dynamics, that atoms in the void and so forth. Because if you look at the two landscapes, the German forest, that's like Mirkwood Forest in Tolkien, it's like you never see the light. Consequently, you get a very murky, sort of dark, melancholic consciousness that comes out of that, the Faustian loneliness, versus the open, sunny atmosphere of Greece and all the sunny islands where there's nothing. Everything is very clear. Usually it's a blue sky. So everything, your symbol becomes very tangible, very Euclidean, very hands-on. So you can see the connection between the landscapes. Maybe the Indian Earth symbol, which is the world as a dream, comes out of a jungle, a world where it's always raining and it's always hot, and you just kind of want to disconnect from it and go into a dream world and forget about it. So you have this ahistorical consciousness. There's almost no such thing as an Indian historian. They just don't have a historical consciousness. The world is a continuous ever-present for them. That's that consciousness.
What about the Egyptian path?
Yeah, and the Egyptian path there, again, because you're single path, the Nile. The Nile is the
Nile. Okay.
Strip of land that you go up and down for transportation. They didn't have the wheel because they didn't need it until later on when the Hyksos conquers them with chariots. Then they take the wheel and go back and conquer Palestine to make sure they don't get conquered again by somebody with a more advanced technology. But all that happens late in Egypt. The Hyksos come in around 1700 BC, so they're already in their moving on into their 19th century decadent phase right at that point when the Hyksos conquer them. That corresponds to the Napoleonic Wars and to the Alexandrian conquests, the Hyksos conquest. So, I would explain it that way.
Okay.
You can see between the landscapes and the ideas.
I mean, I guess I can definitely see it, but it's loose. It's not like mechanistic. It's not like
the consciousness of the people who live in a landscape reflects the characteristics of that landscape. Like, for instance, when Jung took a trip to come to America, he said, your skylines look like pueblos. Did you guys notice that? Isn't that odd? All these rectangular blocks, they do look like pueblos. That's kind of mysterious. What's going on there?
That makes sense. I guess I would like you to maybe contrast it with Arnold Toynbee's way of understanding how civilizations emerged through the challenge and response hypothesis, which was inspired by Goethe's Faust, I guess, whereby he would say that Spengler, Toynbee, as opposed to Spengler, would say that no, actually civilizations emerge out of the geographical challenges that they have. So, for example, the irrigation would be the challenge of the Egyptian society. What would be the challenge of the Western civilization from Toynbee's perspective to, I guess, organize the leftovers of Rome and Hellenistic society and Christian society? What was the challenge of the Faustian society?
Yeah, it's a kind of a mechanistic cause-effect model.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more shallow, a lot more shallow, actually, than Spengler's mystical association between the ideas and the landscape. The landscape for Toynbee becomes the central challenge. The Sumerian challenge, and it's a big one, is to invent irrigation because with dry farming, there's not enough rain. So you can't depend on the rain because the Tigris Euphrates is the alluvial land there is resource poor, very little wood, no metals, and how do we water our fields? So they invent irrigation to solve that problem. That's their response to solving that problem, and it's a brilliant one. The invention of taking rivers, harnessing them, and consequently it leads to water wars, like their version of Athens versus Sparta is Umma versus Lagash. And the two city-states are fighting over access to a certain field of irrigation. So that's the response there. It's physical. And in Egypt, as you say, it's draining the swamps of the delta in the north. They had to clear that out, drain it, and get it organized. That was their challenge. The Faustian challenge is, of course, the forest. You got to cut down the trees and make a clearing. And so we need to create a clearing so that we can have these longhouses. The early Scandinavian longhouses are very horizontal at first as they're coming into being. And yeah, that's it. It's the response to that.
It's like a reclaiming
forest.
It's as if they're reclaiming the open space from the cave.
Yeah, hence Tolkien's myth of, the killing of the Ents, Saruman going after the Ents. Thoroughly dramatic, that whole story. Yeah.
All right.
You can see all of this dramatized in Tolkien, the challenge and response of the Faustian civilization to the forest.
All right. So I guess two more things. I would like you to ask about Jean Gebser's connection with to Marshall McLuhan. So Gebser has this idea of consciousness structures, which he lays out in its ever-present origin, the 5 consciousness structures, the archaic, magic, mythic, mental, and integral. And, consciousness structures, for those who do not know, they are the organizing principles. They are the way you bring the world into being. They are the ground rules, I guess, with which he explains the evolution of history, and he will elaborate on that. And what I would like to I guess, clarify, because I've had that connection, is how Heidegger understands being with a capital B, and especially when he goes on to trace the history of being, when he cuts it up to stages, the pre-Socratic understanding of being, Hellenistic understanding of being, Roman, then the Western, then technological. Would you say, there is a connection between Heidegger's concept of being with a capital B as this organizing principle with the consciousness structures of Jean Gebser, and also would you say that we, in some sense, in contemporary society, experience the clash of different types of consciousness structures, in the sense of, let's say, Western civilization trying to spread mental structure to other countries that do not have the capacity or the experience to just adopt it without having the necessary mutation for it. So I guess that would be the two themes I would like to.
Yeah, that's good. So with the different epochs of being, a la Heidegger, it is very comparable with Gebser, because they're basically doing the same thing, talking about the same thing, starting with the pre-Socratics with being as phusis, which is that when an entity flashes forth in the clearing, arises, and disappears. The autonomy is all out there, not in here. So being is immanental in that sense. It's in things. It's in the world. The world is full of secrets that can reveal themselves to us as they unconceal themselves in the clearing. But with Plato, being changes to being identified with forms that are up there. So being is no longer understood as immanental in the world. The world has already fallen here. Plato's already paving the way for Christianity with this separation of being up there from this world down here, which is a poor shadow copy, a bad Xerox, let's say, of the ultimate Platonic forms. And then it shifts later on with when Christianity comes into being. Being becomes that which is true within the mind of God.
The corresponding.
And being becomes reduced to a being, the Christian God-man. He sees that as a reduction, a diminishment of being to just one being. And then we move on into the whole world after the scholastics. We get into Descartes, and then with Descartes we have the beginnings, not of the discovery of the cogito, but of the XYZ phase space of what he calls Vorhandenheit. And Vorhandenheit is the scientific phase space of purely objective properties, so that any entity, thing, object, person, whatever that you put into that phase space, we can all agree on that we now have objective scientific properties of that thing. But the downside is, in the process of doing that, we de-world the entity and remove it from its context within a particular place and time. And so it gets shorn of all these things which Heidegger regards as very important and of the essence of being. And so it does being a disservice, he thinks. So he sees himself as trying to dismantle Vorhandenheit because he identifies, again, the Western rebel who's rebelling against his teacher, Husserl, who's a mathematician. Heidegger hates mathematics. And this is all bound up with his rebellion against Husserl. It's similar to Jung's rebellion against Freud. That's just the myth, the Promethean rebel. So you get these epochs of being going all the way down to the 20th century, and then now we have in framing, where the world is seen as some potential of resources. That mountain over there, we're not interested in the mountain per se. We're interested in its uranium. It has uranium in it. So
deficient mental structure.
Yeah, deficient mental, precisely. That's what inframing is. Yeah, so these guys are all compatible. You can move them around, line them up, because they're all talking about the same thing, because this is a crisis. And all these individuals have incarnated at this particular time and place. In this German forest world, if you look on a map where these guys live, Gebser, Heidegger in the Black Forest, Spengler in Munich, they're not that far away from each other. It's like all great German minds within a 200-mile radius of each other. So they've all incarnated because they know there's a crisis, and each one is offering a set of solutions to the crisis.
Would you say that the movie Avatar is in some sense incorporates this idea of the inframing mind of the European civilization, trying to enforce it on the magic consciousness structure of their society, where everything is one, where
Cameron does a great job of dramatizing all of this. He hasn't studied philosophy. He doesn't need to. He's just smart and he's got a good imagination. And the whole Avatar paradigm is correct. We are all avatars. Down here, Cameron's got the basic idea, and then the conflict with the whole inframing mentality versus the magical indigenous consciousness structure of the indigenous peoples there. Yeah, he's mapping it out brilliantly, especially in the sequel. I thought the sequel was 10 times better than the first one.
When they go into the water.
Really an amazing epic. I can't wait for the next one.
Okay, so I guess the second question had to do with how different consciousness structures clash, and the reason why it's so important for me to ask you that is because since I come from originally from Georgia, Georgia is, I guess, from Toynbee's perspective, that would be like an offspring to Byzantine culture. It's a satellite culture to Byzantine.
Satellite culture.
And for Spengler, that's the Magian cavernous. It falls within the Magian cavernous symbol, and I would agree with that. It absolutely is.
Central epic, the Georgian epic from the medieval period is the man with the panther skin.
Exactly. Yeah.
You read that? Yeah.
Yeah,
so
of course. Yeah. It's in some sense it's inspired from the Persian Shahnameh, but it has and it's pretty interesting that Wukong from the Journey to the West, he also gets the panther skin at some point. I don't know. And
the motif, the panther skin, you can find it all over the world. Dionysus has it, and so forth.
In that epic, in the Georgian epic, the astrology is a big part of it. Also, and it begins by fleshing out a Neoplatonic sense of the world, and the magic part is pretty interesting. I just want to tell you one scene from it. So basically, they have to so there is this Nestan who's basically, and Tariel is the main protagonist who loves Nestan, and he has to rescue her from Kajeti, which is basically this fortress.
It sounds like Wagner, doesn't it?
Yeah, and so there are three of them: Aftandil, Tariel, and Fridon, and they are organized there, and so they approach the forest and they have to, rescue her. But before that, they have a sort of, I guess, a consultation, how they are going to take the fortress, right? So Aftandil and Fridon, the other two guys, they offer more of a rational ways. The one guy tells him, okay, let's do it this way. Let's get the tightrope. I know how to walk on the tightrope. I'd walk there. I'd walk over the forest. I'd jump there, cause chaos there from the inside, while you can attack the forest. Then Aftandil says, okay, here's my plan. My plan would be to go there as merchants. They will let us in, and then we're going to basically jump off from it and cause chaos, and we're going to confuse them, and that way we can take the forest. So Tariel, the main protagonist, who is this very strong guy who can defeat tigers and this and that, so he listens to them. He's like, yeah, thank you. I'm really delighted. But here's what we're gonna do. Let's just divide our army into three parts and let's just attack them. We'll take it. And what happens, and of course, it's in some sense ironic, they follow Tariel's plan, which is not a plan. It's just emotion. It's just this magic trust. And they take the forest. They gain the victory. So the rational, abstract ideas go out of the window, and Tariel's plan to just storm it, that works. The pure emotion, the magic, and it is kind of, in the, as far as I remember, it was tied to planets and astrology and them helping them. And it was, in some sense, from that perspective, the reason why Jean Gebser resonated with me is seeing globalization from the third world perspective. All you see is mental consciousness structure trying to infiltrate the cultures that do not have the capacity for it. And all you see is pure mimesis of it. And I guess that's why in third world countries, especially in Caucasus region, Russian propaganda is so powerful, is because Russia knows how to do its propaganda. All they're saying is, most of the time their propaganda has to do with, West is trying to take all your values away. They're destroying your religion and traditions with rationality, this and that. They know what they're doing with their propaganda. And the reason why I'm asking you is, how would you picture this sort of clash between different consciousness structures who cannot really communicate?
Thanks for that. I had completely forgotten the plot of Man with the Panther Skin, because I think it's been 20 years. I read it once 20 years ago, and you reanimated it for me.
Yeah.
The delight that I had when I was reading it was great. And you're right, it is connected to the Shahnameh, which I was reading at about the same time. A brand new translation of the Shahnameh had just come out. That was excellent. And I was working on reading international epics for a while there. For about 10 years, that's what I was hopping around the world reading international epics. And there's another one, the Islamic one that comes out of where the Harappan civilization used to be, which is it Urdu that they speak there? It's an Urdu epic called The Adventures of Amir Hamza. And that is also connected to the Shahnameh. All these great fun epics there. Yeah, and you're right that a lot of what's going on with the clash of the consciousness structures is the mental structure, which is the industrialization stratum that the West has deposited, you might say, as a whole mental consciousness structure around the earth using its industrial machinery. But underneath that are older consciousness structures of indigenous peoples, which are usually magical, because when you have a tradition that does not have writing, you automatically have orality, and orality has its consciousness structure, which is the same thing as the magical consciousness structure. Walter Ong was a pupil of Marshall McLuhan, and he writes a book about it, Orality and Literacy. And if you sit down and read it, it's a brilliant analysis of the orality consciousness structure. He doesn't realize he's describing the magical structure. But that's what it is. It's a conflict between, and whatever the myths are, there will be a mythical stratum in there too of the stories that they tell. Once you're in storytelling mode, you're in the mythical consciousness structure, because the magical is all about the connection on the astral plane between everything. Everything is interconnected subtly by the law of attraction, whereby, like, if you want to make a magic thing happen over there, you draw an animal on the ground, throw a spear at it, and that magically resonates through the web to reality, and you come back with the deer, and then erase the image. Like attracts like. That's the magical. But the moment we're all sitting down around the fire, now we've activated the mythical consciousness structure, which is on top of that, because it has to do with images and stories. So it'll be both of those that are at variance with the mental consciousness structure, particularly out here in America with the Native Americans here. I've studied a lot of their mythology and their conflicts with the Western white Anglo consciousness that has come in with a totally different mentality. They come in looking for gold. The Native Americans don't value gold. They regard it as worthless. Turquoise, their primary mineral that they value and that they use in monetary exchanges. Like the Hopi Indians, who are the descendants of the Anasazis in the Southwest, would do trade with the Mesoamericans. They would come up with these lovely macaws, these beautiful birds, and so they would trade turquoise for the birds, because there's not much turquoise down there south of the border. But all of this, Moby Dick is really, and we just finished reading through Moby Dick, but this is what Moby Dick is about. Manifest destiny, the quest for the whale is the quest for the gold, and trampling over anybody that gets in your way. The Native Americans, in other words, they're on a distinct tribe, the Pequod, and the whole ship sinks. It's a very dire, like the Titanic, it's a very dire prophecy that Melville has for this Anglo-Saxon civilization. And he, by the way, this is 1851 when he wrote this, and he wrote it and published it to the sound of crickets. No one had any interest in it whatsoever, because he was already outside the box of Christianity, and he was more interested in pagan spirituality and in talking and discussing about pagan gods and myths. And when he mentions God in the book, he says the gods. The gods watch. It's always gods, plural, with him. So he's outside the Christianity box, because for him, Christianity is a religion of conquest. It's a religion that puts other peoples as inferior, so that they become thought of as subhuman, so that then Christianity is superior to that, so therefore we can subjugate them and enslave them. So that's his critique of Christianity in Moby Dick, and I think it's absolutely correct. Nowadays out here, I visited a whole bunch of these Native American sites out here in the Southwest. And nowadays it's all full of whites who want to know why we did this genocide. They go to these sites and they're like, oh, these cool paintings, all this cool stuff that they did. Why did we stomp on them? Because we wanted the gold and silver. That was the motivation for going west. All the towns in the American Southwest spring up around gold mines, copper mines, or silver mines. And then once those mines are gone, the towns become ghost towns. That's how shallow these towns are. It's like Spengler when he's describing the Hellenistic cities that are, an Acme kit out in the middle of nowhere in Palestine or somewhere in Arabia. You set up a Hellenistic culture city, and then it becomes a ghost town 2 centuries later. So that the entire Middle East is full of these Hellenistic ghost towns. Same thing out here in the American Southwest. It's all going to be ghost towns. because there's no spiritual rootedness to any of these towns, with the exception of Salt Lake City, which was founded by the Mormons. That will probably be there for a long, long time. It'll outlast these little mercantile town operations. Even the big cities like Phoenix, Houston, these are going to be ghost metropolises in 2 centuries. I guarantee it. I actually used a medium to interview Oswald Spengler, and I asked him this very question, and he said, yes, of course. That's exactly what's going to happen to those southwestern cities. They will be ghost towns, ghost metropolises. Plus, there's not enough water. If you look at the water for these towns, they all depend on the Colorado River almost. It's all of them. And the Colorado River is drying up. If you look at it, at the water level, it's feet below the so-called bathtub rim.
You cut off when you were talking about Colorado River. It's
sunk 100 feet. That's how depleted it is below the bathtub rim. You can see the bathtub rim above it where it used to be. So it's sinking. The river, it's depleting. So it's going to be gone 3 centuries from now. There's not going to be a river there. So the entire Southwest will have to be evacuated. It's not sustainable. To speak in the language of the ecologists, some of which their principles I agree with, but not all of them. It's not sustainable. But anyhow.
Yeah. So, I mean, since you mentioned Melville and the white Anglo-Saxon society, the WASPs, as it is known, would you say that in current state of United States, where there are lots of ethnic minorities from Mexico, the black society, immigrants from cultures that have a rich oral tradition, would you say that there will be such thing as a sort of clash, I guess, and more of a frustration of the internal proletariat, using Toynbee's term, with the WASP society, in the sense that America's society is based purely on mental consciousness structure, and the people who are best adapted to it are, I guess, people who have such structure. And, immigrants, mostly the ethnic minorities, I guess, from their cultural background, they fall more within mythic magic consciousness structure. And I guess the reason why I'm asking you is that I want to hear a sort of a prediction from you. How does the clash between consciousness structures play out? What is the end result when they are irreconcilable?
It's hybridization. So take, for example, the Vedic Aryans. They come into the Harappan landscape. Those would be the natives, the indigenous peoples there. The Harappan landscape, where they have writing. They're doing lots of trade around the Gulf, by the way, with Mesopotamia. That's where they get all their wealth. And they build their cities with flat roofs. Very sophisticated drainage system. But their religion is yoga and the worship of the great mother involved in all of that. So that's not part of Vedic Aryan religion at all. They don't have barely any goddesses. If you read the hymns of the Rig Veda, there's maybe 5 hymns to goddesses, and all the rest are to gods like Agni, the fire god, Indra, their version of Thor, and so forth. These are all masculine, patriarchal, tough people who do not have writing like the Harappans do. It's an entirely oral tradition. They bring in the whole mantra thing, and they have excellent memory. So they come in with their world, and you read the Rig Veda, and that's all it is. It has nothing to do with the Harappan world. It's a different sign regime. So you have 2 different sign regimes, but gradually over the centuries, they fuse. They hybridize to where the goddess is brought in. She first appears in the Kena Upanishad. Now she's in there. And then they slowly bring in reincarnation and yoga, none of which is in the Rig Veda. So the native people who have been there the longest have the most influence because they've been there for so long. And then it eventually transforms and it becomes the great goddess-worshipping civilization par excellence to this day, the only civilization that puts the goddess as the primary deity, the Durga goddess, or Devi, as she's also called. You can plug her into any of her incarnations, but it's Devi. And so that's the fate. And so it's called acculturation by anthropologists. And you can already see it happening in America by virtue of the fact that half of our superheroes are Native American characters, such as Batman, who's a Mesoamerican character, Wolverine, Ant-Man, Spider-Woman, Spider-Man, especially Spider-Woman, Black Widow. They're all Native American heroes. So just by this mysterious process of acculturation, these guys in New York, Jewish guys who are inventing comic books, don't know anything about Native American mythology, but it doesn't matter, because the land has its own language that is expressed through human speech, and it slowly will come up, and there'll be a transformation. So we are already acculturating, or Native Americans are already acculturating us. We just don't realize the process is going on. This is what the end result will be. It will be a hybridized sign regime.
Would you say that Spider-Man is in some sense a counter-irritation to this rectangular architecture of New York, where someone's just curvilinear and flows, and
The web is always the Spider Woman is the almost universal. It's female because the spider weaves, and women usually do all the weaving in a society. So and it's a female architecture, the round web. It is a reaction. It should be Spider Woman is really what it should be. That's what she's the creator being. Koyanwuti in Hopi mythology, she's the one who makes humans, and she's also the one who solves all the problems. She's like the Hermes Mercury tote, Enki figure. They always go to her. She lives down in a hole in the ground, so they always have to go down into the hole to visit her to get the solution, and she'll inevitably have the solution to the problem. So that's a good catch on that, Spider.
All right. So I guess the next question has to do with Marshall McLuhan, since I really wanted to ask a couple of questions on McLuhan's media analysis. So McLuhan, unlike Toynbee and Spengler, his approach is to understand the culture's essence and cultural temperament via the media. So, for example, McLuhan, unlike Spengler, he would say that the reason why Greeks developed formal logic and Euclidean geometry is because of the phonetic alphabet. It's not because of, I guess, islands and so on and so forth. Now, I have a couple of questions regarding McLuhan. The first thing is, if McLuhan believes that the cultural temperament and cultural behavior has to do with the dominating media within the culture, why is it that he still says that Russian culture is oral and that it has the magic component to it, although Russians have phonetic alphabet? In some sense, Marshall McLuhan's analysis of Russia does coincide with Spengler's analysis, whereby Spengler says that no, Tolstoy and Peter is not your Russia. It's Dostoevsky, it's their peasants, it's the Christian orthodoxy that has never read the Bible but knows it's true. It doesn't need its Saint Petersburg, which is just a ghost city. So I guess my question would be, why does Marshall McLuhan, if he's like, isn't that a bit of an inconsistency that he treats Russia as an oral culture, although they have the phonetic alphabet? And I would also want you to comment on maybe the limitations of explaining the whole of culture by just looking on media, I guess.
I think it would be Walter Ong, his pupil, who would solve that by saying that what it is, it's an oral residue. It's not that Russia is oral, but it retains a heavily oral bias. Because oral organization is mnemonic, which is why you get oral residue in Homer, when you get wise, clever Odysseus, these epithets, wise Nestor, those are oral, that's an oral residue. It carries over into the literate mind. Repetition, the catalogs, the repetition of the ships, that's all the result of oral rote memorization, which the Hindus, by the way, were the world masters of, because writing came very late to India, so like 600 BC, and mainly for commercial purposes, not writing the myths. They don't write the myths down until much later. But the British were astonished when they went into India and they would interview a pandit who had memorized the Ramayana, let's say, and then another pandit in another location who had memorized it. So it's a different recension. It's basically the same story. These guys who devote their entire lifetime to memorizing one book, just like the ending of Ray Bradbury's novel Fahrenheit 451, where as the books are being burned, individuals are committing them to memory. Like I might be the guy who memorizes Wuthering Heights because it no longer exists in physical form because they burned it, so I can recite it line by line. That's what the Hindus did. So it's a very heavily oral society, even though it exists within the realm of high civilization. India is a high civilization. There's no question about that. They have mathematics. They have astronomy. They can build large temples, produce beautiful artwork, and they're doing all of this without writing, which is somewhat astonishing. So yeah, cultures can have oral residues on them. I think that's what Ong would say really meaning with regard to Russia. Dostoevsky is closer to the soil, closer to the genuine, authentic world, because for Spengler, the peasant population in a land are so rooted in the land that they have the authentic spirit of it within them. No matter what they think consciously, it's there. Whereas St. Petersburg is artificial. It was designed just for commercial reasons, because they needed a port, and they didn't have one, so they wanted to do trade in the Baltic, and so they imported, all the Baroque architectural culture forms and created a very phantom-looking city. And I've never been there, but even looking at photos of it, it looks ghostly, phantom, and surreal, even to me. So I agree with Spengler and Dostoevsky on that. It's not the real deal. Moscow is the heart and core, and Kiev. Moscow and Kiev are the two centers of Russian civilization.
And how he contrasts this, I guess, with these onion cupolas that are horizontal and rounds off this triangular mental structure, and Gothic Cathedral with its circular shapes, and you've also
the mythical is all round mother goddess shapes, and the mental is it's a triangle of the syllogistic reasoning, thesis, antithesis. There's always three. It's always a triangle, but it's a triangle that starts with the Greeks like this. It's a vertical triangle with the Platonic forms up here, and you go down the ladder to sensible forms. And then starting in the Renaissance, Gebser says that triangle gets laid down horizontally and becomes the vanishing point, a three-dimensional depth perspectival painting. So it's a different phase. There's a vertical phase of the mental consciousness and a horizontal phase. Two phases.
As for the thesis and antithesis, I remember me writing an undergrad essay comparing Mephistopheles with Woland, which is the character of Master and Margarita's from Bulgakov, where he's basically Satan. Woland is basically Faust in the sense that in the Walpurgisnacht, when Mephistopheles brings Faust to the mountain, he presents himself as Sir Woland, and that's. Have you read?
I haven't read
Master and Margarita. Oh yeah. So
is it good?
It's very good. I believe that it captures the mythic consciousness structure very well. The Slavic mythic structure, because one aspect and the Woland from Master and Margarita is very different from Mephistopheles. And one key difference as a trailer, I guess, is that at some point in the novel, it's not a novel, I guess, but Woland meets disciple Matthew, who is sent by Jesus, and disciple Matthew reprimands Woland, calling him the god of darkness, the god of shadows. And so Woland is like, well, don't you need me in order for you to shine? Don't you need me in order for you to call yourself bright? Don't you need me in order for you to call yourself true and truthful and righteous? So then, as the story progresses, we find out that actually, in the end, they do cooperate, Woland and Jesus, in some sense. They are not the thesis and antithesis as it is in the case of God and Mephistopheles in Faust. So it's more polar and mythic, and that, I guess, what that's, I guess, is important to consider, because there's this misconception. I don't know why is it so common to think that Russia is Europe. It's not. It's simply not.
No.
I agree with Spengler.
Yes,
It absolutely is not. Yeah.
Yeah, two totally different civilizations. Now, the Russian, right now, Russia's clearly entering its, what Spengler would call its springtime. I think it's done with the pre-cultural phase. It's evident in the architecture, like that cathedral built to the soldiers is magnificent. And it's the quality, same quality you would find amongst our Gothic cathedrals back in the 12th century in Paris. Same quality. So it's, apparently, as Spengler's predicted, I think correctly, we're going to see a third version of Christianity coming out of all this. Putin is very closely allied with the church, and the immune system is very strong. It's back into its where it belongs, where Spengler predicted it would be within about a century, back to its authentic religiousness and piety in connection to the soil. So it has 1,000 years ahead of it to go through its cultural transformations. The future belongs to Russia, and that's what smarts the West. That's what they're hurting, because they're afraid of Russia. They know Russia's the next big thing. That's what these wars are about. The West thinks it owns the planet because we built all these machines that everyone now depends on for their survival. So thank God for the West. What else can we give you? So this is a clash of civilizations. In Huntington's terms, that's precisely what it is. Two Earth symbols, one of infinite space going up against another one, which is infinite horizontal plane, the horizon, the brotherhood.
Do you believe that Russia has the creative capacity to surpass West in technological development?
Very possibly, yeah, very possibly. The Russian mind is pretty sophisticated, technologically, philosophically,
and
the West has made a huge mistake thinking that because of what happened to Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union with a drunk president. That's what they think is still going on. There's still a drunk president in charge. He may be sober, but the Russians are incompetent. They're laggards technologically. These are not facts. Washington has gotten a lot of BS about Russia because their economy is doing very, very well. But we keep getting the propaganda that they're hurting, that this war is dragging them down the drain. Everybody hates Putin. It's the exact opposite. Scott Ritter is this guy, one of my favorite guys, who's a reliable narrator. He was the UN weapons inspector who blew the whistle in Iraq saying there are no weapons of mass destruction here. And he's a former Marine and very bright. He's written books. He said he just got back from Russia. He went to Russia like a year ago, and he said the economy is thriving. I don't know what's going on with the Western media, but they're misrepresenting the situation. The Russians are doing very, very well, and they're all behind Putin. So the West is getting a lot of propaganda. And because of that, he comes back and now he's being harassed by the FBI because he gets on these programs on YouTube and he tells the truth. And now the FBI went to his house. They raided his house, went through all his possessions. They didn't arrest him yet, but they're likely to. So this place over here is turning into a police state. It's becoming more and more like living under Stalin. A lot of ironies.
Well, as for Russia, I guess since I come from a post-Soviet Union country, I kind of have a different perspective on it. Since when Western country conquers you and colonizes you, the good part of it is they bring technology in, they bring railway, they bring this, they bring that.
That's the Faustian bar. That's what it is. The
Russian invasion of Georgia, I guess, and the Russian terror of Georgia, and to this day they've occupied 20% of our land, and they're terrorizing the villages, and they're trying to gain as much land as possible. Completely their attitude is completely immoral. They tell us that Putin will say that we're their brothers or something of that sort, but they will kill us without zero remorse. But one thing to say is that the education that took place in Soviet Union and that was spilled over, and the Georgian intellectuals that were erudites, they got all their education from St. Petersburg, from the western part of it. So you see, the thing that I'm trying to say is that Russian colonists do not look as good as Western colonists. And I think that's, in some sense, that's a way to say that for now, if we compare, how Russia conquers to how West conquers, from a technological and industrial perspective, I guess West is superior from that perspective because, look at Armenia, for example. It's a satellite country of Russia. What do they have? They're not technologically advanced. There is corruption there that they're fighting. There is the street crime. Russian-influenced countries in Caucasus region where I live, they still cannot escape the street gang mentality. There are so many problems regarding the basic civility. So, for example, in Russia, to this day, they can't solve the problem of the, let's say, this gangster mentality and the gang leaders ruling the businesses and so on and so forth. So what I would say to that is, although there's lots of propaganda, I don't really see the organizing power. They have the emotional part. They have the immune system. They have this... They have this idea of, no, we are not the West. We have to resist this like satanic forces or whatever. But I don't think that they have covered the civil technological aspect that is absolutely necessary in order for you to have, I guess, in order for you to manage colonies and in order for you to spread your power. So I would like to ask you, what precursors do you see in Russian history that would suggest that they have the capacity to come up with such high-level technology, I guess?
What I know about the history of Russian civilization is a series of political transformations, right? We have the Kievan period, 888, roughly right in there, Kievan Rus. That's where it all starts. It's ground zero with with the Viking guys that come in and set up shop in Kiev, and it goes on for a couple of centuries, and then the Mongols come in, so they come invading in the 12th century, and now they have a Mongolian pseudomorphosis on top of them, but then they defeat the Mongols, and they eventually kick them out. They hire the mercenaries, is it Cossacks?
Cossacks?
Yeah. They hire the mercenaries to go and conquer all of Siberia, for the same reasons that Egypt conquered Palestine after the Hyksos invasion, to make sure it doesn't happen again. So that's why it's so large. Because they're dealing with very flat space that's easy to invade. They conquer the Mongols, they get through that, and then we get down to, with the end of the Romanovs, when we get down to around 1600, the time of crisis, where there's a struggle for possession over the throne. And then finally they put in this 16-year-old kid, Michael, and Michael Romanov, rather. It was the end of the previous regime. So they keep having these transformations, like every couple of centuries, they'll go through transformations. And then they had to industrialize in the 19th century. That was a big deal. They had to emancipate the serfs under Alexander II, was it? They emancipate the serfs. That causes a big labor problem. There are assassinations by anarchists. And they've been through the grinder, I think. They've been tested over and over again for their survival ability. They survived Napoleon by burning Moscow, which Spengler says is a very Maccabean thing for them to do. It's like the Maccabean hatred of the Hellenists. Same kind of mentality, willing to burn their own city. So they've survived everything. They survived World War II. Hitler coming in there, that ended the Nazis pretty much more than anything else did. Because there's an endless supply of people in Russia. I know now they have a lower population than they should be for a healthy, what Spengler would call a healthy newborn civilization. The birth rates are kind of low. But nonetheless, the cultural history does strike me as being very powerful. These guys are very tough people that can survive just about anything. And the philosophers that I've read of them are all spectacularly brilliant. So it may just take time. If they are, as you say, technologically behind, they'll correct that. They'll catch up because they're a civilization that's on the rise. Now, I don't know anything about the politics of the satellite states, Armenia and Georgia and Kazakhstan and all of that. So that's your knowledge ground. I don't know what's going on with them.
Yeah.
There's always that kind of problem. When you get a high civilization, There's always these satellite states around it. With Egypt, you have the Nubians as a satellite state there to the south, and the Libyans to the west as a satellite state that they were constantly having tensions with. And then eventually the Libyans get in and they become pharaohs. Time is always on the side of the barbarian, Toynbee says. So the Libyans get in, now we've got a Libyan pharaoh. Imagine that. They get in eventually, the satellite cultures, and there again, it's the hybridization of sign regimes that then takes place.
Yeah, well, I guess
it's satellite states too.
Yeah, the reason why I compared it to the West is because so I speak Russian, and I frequently watch like Russian TV shows, what's happening there, this and that. And one major, so what I would say, I guess West gets wrong about Russia is when Westerners would think that Russia is a sort of a heaven of Christian traditionalism. So the problem with it, I guess, is that, so for example, in Western society, and Spengler absolutely covers that, there is this principle of identity, whereby Protestants or white religious people, they feel this strong sense of having their worldview and religion in accordance with their behavior, so that the physical plane goes along with the mental plane. So if you believe that, let's say, Russia is this heaven's place of, I guess, a traditionalist heaven of Christianity, if you go in Russia, that's not the impression that you're going to have. When we were kids, our fathers used to joke all the time that in Soviet Union, if you wanted to have sex, you'd go to Russia. Till this day, so we frequently speak about this idea that, this free sex and promiscuity, this and that, is completely Western. Russia was always sexually promiscuous in that sense. I've never...
I'm not at all surprised by that for some reason.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that it's like, I think that there is this hypocrisy aspect to it when, you're basing your propaganda on Christianity and you have such a high rape rate, such a high crime rate. You're not necessarily the most sexually conservative country. They produce pornography, their porn production is pretty high. So, them brutally murdering and killing their satellite countries. So, for example, the war in Chechnya, the war in Georgia, 1991, 2008. So what I'm trying to say is that they don't have this Western idea of, we are Christians and we are going to act like Christians. There is no correspondence between the two. So that's one reason why I was never, let's say...
Maybe it'll slide away like a pseudomorphosis then. Maybe if it's not as rooted as you say, then it should gradually disappear over time.
Yeah, I guess, because, the crime aspect of Russia, because the thing about crime is that the Western crime is very different from Russian crime, from what I've analyzed. In Russia, a crime is not just a statistical phenomenon; it's an attitude, it's a mentality, it's an aesthetic, right? Yep. It's a glamour, them have those crime leaders having their worldview, their authority. This is
a little like David Cronenberg's Eastern Promises, right?
I guess.
Glamour.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I guess because where I come from, the country is continuously being terrorized from Russia, and the fact that I have more of a different perspective on it, since I come from a society that has been colonized and terrorized by Russia for so long. I have a pretty different perspective, and your perspective, I guess, is more global, I guess. But yeah,
my perspective is always bird's eye view.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So I guess for our closing part, I would like to ask you about Peter Sloterdijk, since I always tell my friends that two people that are alive and whom you can read and say that they are contemporary living intellectuals. I would say it's John David Ebert and it's Peter Sloterdijk.
That's a very flattering comparison, because Sloterdijk is Sloterdijk, I guess it's pronounced. Is one of my titans. I just think he's one of the giants. Probably the greatest living philosopher. Maybe him and Alexander Dugin, I would say. Slavoj Žižek is a lot of fun, but he's like a parody of a philosopher. He's not really
I mean,
philosopher. You know, he's just kind of a comedian of after Baudrillard died, somebody accused him of just being a comedian of ideas. That appellation fits much better with Žižek than it does Baudrillard.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read much Žižek, but from what I listened,
it definitely has a good sense of humor, and a lot of personality comes through on the page. It's not dry reading at all. He's fun. I don't mean to diss him. He's fun. I like him.
Yeah, sure. And as for the Sloterdijk, I would like you to ask you about his book "You Must Change Your Life." I'm currently reading it, and it's this very strange thesis that he puts forward, that basically he starts by speaking about the new atheist movement, the Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, those guys, and Christopher Hitchens, I guess. And so then he goes on to say that, those guys, those new atheists, they were skeptical that God is real, this and that they would, go against the arguments regarding the existence of God. But they missed something very crucial. Namely, none of them were suspicious. None of them were skeptical regarding the existence of religion itself. And Peter Sloterdijk goes on to say that the thesis of this book will be that there are no religions, but there are practices of the vertical practices of self-improvement. Now, reading that in the introduction, that was too strange, too vague for me. So could you please tell us what is it about? What's the catch? What does it mean when he say that it's mostly practices? And
well, it's connected to. I'm trying to think of the title of the other book. It's a short book, Wisdom as Practice, or something like that, where it's more defined there because that's a shorter book. And I'll retrieve the title at some point. It'll come to me, the correct title, where he's talking about philosopher as the individual who exists in a state of suspended animation. In other words, he's dead to the world. He doesn't live in the flow of time. His practice involves being outside of time and inventing a practice that suspends his thought and brackets the world. So that's how he's kind of talking about practice. And there are innumerable ways of doing that. Religion is one way, but so are these individuals. And he really has in mind here as his paradigm the Karl Jaspers's axial age, where it starts producing these individuals like Pythagoras and Plato, Confucius and Lao Tzu, in India, the Buddha and Parshvanatha. Across the board, we get these individuals who are religions unto themselves because they are responding, in Toynbee's terms, to the challenge of the collapse of the first generation of civilization, namely Mesopotamia and Egypt, along with their two satellites, Harappa and Minoan Crete. They're collapsing, so the axial age philosophers are responding with religions of self-salvation, like yoga. If you practice yoga, you don't need the priests. The Brahmin priests who think religion consists in pouring melted butter into a fire is child's play compared to yoga. Sit down and I will teach you how to save your life through the practice of this particular form, yoga, or whatever it happens to be. Lao Tzu wants you to go out into the woods and reject cities and set up your own colony out in the woods. Reject Confucius. He's at war with Confucius. He really despises Confucius, whose response to their crisis was to uphold all the customs of the cult of the elders, the ancestors, and filial piety. Even if you don't believe in the gods, it doesn't matter because performing the rites will uphold the society. It's absolutely correct about that. But Lao Tzu wants nothing to do with it. So we get all these reactions against priesthoods. It was already foreshadowed with Akhenaten in 1350 BC, his rebellion against the Theban priesthood. He goes and sets up his own religion at Amarna. For 13 years, he has the world's first utopian city that he builds as a response to the corruption of that priesthood. In Gilgamesh, you can already see it. It's much older, 1750 BC, but you can see that he's responding against the official city priesthood of Inanna, and rejecting the goddess worship and the whole effeminate cult of the castrati men who surround her. So you can see these, Gilgamesh and Akhenaten are forerunners. I've written about this in my book, Rage in the Word, which was inspired by Sloterdijk's Rage in Time, analyzing these guys plus Moses with his rejection of anything Egyptian whatsoever. And he's most likely an Egyptian himself who's become an internal proletariat within Egypt, and then they get exiled and become an external proletariat. These are all reactions, and I think Sloterdijk is talking about how each one of these guys has their own technique of self-salvation that is eccentric to religion. It's in an orbit outside of it. These guys are lone wolf nomads setting up their own institutions outside the official religions of the time. So I think he's coming out from the Jasper's perspective in his book about the origin and goal of history. The Axial Age, which comes in about 500 BC, and he sees it ending 200 BC. So it's really only 3 centuries for him, but I see it as a broader window than that. That goes from, let's say, Akhenaten in 1350 to Jesus, year 0. He's sort of the last of these axial prophets, Jesus is. So anyhow.
So would you say that Sloterdijk has this prophetic sense? What's your sense of Sloterdijk and his vision of future? Does Sloterdijk provide a solution to the current crisis of foaming and complete the fact that West lost its macrosphere, which anchors its meaning structure? How do you see Sloterdijk's solution to that?
I'm not sure that I do see one. I'm trying to think back through his books. I've read quite a few of them, maybe 10 of them. I don't see anything in there where he's providing a solution to the problem, other than that perhaps he has this axial age model in mind. You go and create your own religion, which is essentially what I have done. I've gone outside of academia and outside of official religion and just created my own spiritual worldview on my own as a lone wolf. Take it or leave it. I offer it to people who are I'm not interested in converting anyone to anything, but I do think I found some truth here, some real truth with meat in it that I'm happy to pass along, because in my case I had to pay a lot of high prices, such as social ostracism, long periods of celibacy, off and on. But
your Wikipedia page was taken down, as far as I'm concerned.
All kinds of things. Wikipedia says I don't exist because I self-publish. So every time somebody tries to create a Wikipedia page about me, they exit it out. I'm not official. That's good, because that means I'll have new ideas to offer. It's the guys who appear outside the mainstream where the fresh ideas come from that then found new mainstreams. So that's the process.
All right.
Let me just get in a quick advertisement here for my new book, Every Angel is Terrifying.
Okay.
This is a painting on the cover. It's a novel. The painting on the cover from a German artist who's about your age, Hannes Looney, and it's actually the paternal vulva. That's essentially what it, because this book is about a man who creates a clone of himself, a genetically engineered clone, and everything that could go wrong does go wrong. And it's told from the viewpoint of his daughter, growing up on a military base in West Phoenix in the 70s and 80s. So it's based on real people, everyone in here, even though it's kind of, I'm not comparing it to Moby Dick, but it's a similar kind of thing in that Moby Dick was the first novel to be a hybrid of nonfiction with fiction, which is why nobody understood it. So this is also a hybrid of nonfiction and as well. And it looks through the history of evolution at all these bizarre animals from a Goethean morphological perspective, because the scientist guy who's the father is familiar with Goethe's morphological approach. So it's very anti-Darwin. He doesn't think mutations are an accident, although he doesn't have the paradigm of view of angels and so forth. So that's what the book is about, and it's hardcover, jam-packed, color illustrations. We go through the history of hominid evolution. I've stolen from Sloterdijk the term anthropogeny, which is what I call the hominid evolution, and just all kinds of stuff, illustrations and So it goes for about $57 because it's expensive to print.
Can we find it on Amazon?
On Amazon, yeah. Just type in John David.
Now,
It's terrifying. And I'll add one more note. It's the first of a trilogy of 3 novels, and I'm already in the middle, halfway through writing the second one, and just having a blast. So yeah.
I will include the link.
That would be great.
Description.
Yeah.
Can you maybe? I mean, my viewers, I always tell them that I'm inspired by you, so they will be interested in your book. So can you please tell us whether your book will, in some sense, act as an introduction to general cosmology and organic, holistic thinking?
Yes, that's exactly right, because it goes through the entire history of life on the planet from a Goethean morphological point of view, which says that there are no accidents. The mutations are not accidental. Everything is moving towards something, and the scientist is piecing this together in his notebooks. And the daughter, he's already killed himself, and she's inherited his journals. So she's going through reading his journals and making funny, witty little comments about all the different transformations, making fun of some of the hominids, Lucy, and so forth. So it's kind of a duet between the sciences and the humanities. She's an artist, and he was a genetic engineer, a very patriarchal, stern individual that she had to endure this harsh tyranny growing up under him. But eventually she comes of age as a teenager, and she sees through him and his patriarchal military world that she grows up in, and she finds her own sense of identity. And so that's what it's about. The protagonist is female, but there's a reason for that. She's meant to activate the Alice archetype in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, where there, in that case, it's like an 8-year-old girl, but he sends her through all these knowledge-scapes, geometrical, non-Euclidean geometrical knowledge-scapes. That's sort of the inspiration. I kind of compare it to that. It's kind of an Alice, in the Alice tradition. Send her wandering over all these patriarchal knowledge landscapes. And then the second book goes through the history of death and burial, and also the history of the universe, starting with the Big Bang, and we'll go through all the transformations there. So you'll learn a lot from this. It isn't just fun and games. It's meant to show you that there's another way outside the academic establishment, Darwin, Dawkins, outside all of that, of looking at the history of evolution from a completely different point of view that I think people will find refreshing.
I mean, what you've told me so far, it sounds really captivating, because you rarely ever encounter a book that incorporates both the power of fiction, so that you can actually memorize it. Because you see, when you put it into a meta narrative, you memorize, you make sense of it. It's not splattered around, and also making. So yeah, I guess if anyone is interested in seeing a harmonious relationship between a rational mind and the artistic mind, they should check out the book. I will definitely be reading it.
I always wished one of the reasons I wrote it was.
Oh, you cut off. You cut off. So one of
why I wrote it was that in reading Goethe's writings, they're all short. They're all just little essays on a few rocks over here, metamorphosis of plants over there. And I wished that he had put it all together in a single coherent view of the history of evolution, looking through his eyes. So that's sort of what I've tried to do. Not that I have his talent, but I'm trying to look through his eyes at the history of what we know about life on the planet, just to apply the morphological method, which, after all, very few people have taken Goethe's morphological method seriously. Spengler, and then Leo Frobenius, and then over here, Joseph Campbell, and then I inherited it from Joseph Campbell, this morphological way of looking at the world in terms of forms, forms, archetypes. So yeah, it is a philosophical novel. It's not just a fun and games. It is very funny, though. The girl does have a great sense of humor. It's a lot of good jokes.
Is the electronic version available or not yet?
Not yet. I'm going to put out a paperback version in a few months, so the cost will come down. It'll be a little cheaper. Because it's such a visual book, it really isn't going to work in Audible. Or I do have a PDF I can send you if you want the PDF. That's fine. I could bounce that your way. So
Yeah, okay. I'll definitely put the link. So that will be the trilogy.
Yes, the trilogy. The sequel is called Motorcycle Girl Descends into Hell. So all the imagery in that is actually a reworking of Dante's Inferno in terms of the modern landscape of Phoenix, Arizona as a hell, which basically is, as she goes through the various stages there. And then the third book will rework the Paradiso, because it'll all be about her mastering astral projection and going out into the astral rings and having adventures out in there that will correspond to the Paradiso. And it's called There's No Place That Does Not See You, which is another line from a Rilke poem. So that's the plan.
And I guess what it reminded me of is your poem Archai. It seems to me that you do have this project
if you've read Archai, this book will make even more sense to you, because you already have the structure in your mind.
I just want to tell our viewers that what you're trying to do, namely that in Archai, it's a poem that tries to sketch out a history of living organisms, starting from the beginning up to the complex organisms, but doing it via the means of poetry, and you don't find anyone doing that. So I guess
it is hard to find. That's why I did it, because I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah.
That's sort of what you have to do when you notice something's missing in the world of culture that you really wish was there. Well, put it there then. You put it there. So that's how I interpreted it. But fuck it, I'll do it. But and that would be a good prologue to anyone who wants to read this, because this just makes it. The book in prose makes it more concrete and has all images. If I'm talking about aerobic bacteria, there's a picture of an aerobic bacteria with a caption. We'll go through the whole thing. There's all kinds of weird creatures in here that I'll bet nobody even knows about, like the one I just showed. Weird mammals that are just a pleasure. After the dinosaurs are gone, there's this wonderful mammalian epoch called the Oligocene. And it had the largest mammals that ever existed. They're like the Brontosaurus equivalents. Rhinos are descended from this creature called Indricotherium, which was 20 feet high at the shoulders. No horn yet, but you can see the rhino outline. So it gradually scaled down over time. We look at the evolution of the whale. We go through. The whale starts as like a rat on land and slowly aquatically regresses as a devolution back to the water. So we go through that. So there's lots of fun rabbit holes that we go through. I'm having a blast. These are the funnest books I've ever written in my life. So I know that it'll take a while to catch on, because again, it's the shock of the new. There'll be some head scratching for a while, but it'll catch on eventually. It's too much fun not to.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds really fun and informative at the same time. Giving the best. So I guess for the closing of our interview, my viewers would be very angry if I didn't ask your opinion about a couple of hot topics. But if you do not want to answer them, it's fine. I won't include it. So I guess I have to ask you about the current conflict, the Israel-Palestine thing. If I didn't, So that's So what's your?
I think it's a disaster. I think Netanyahu is the worst thing to happen to the Middle East in forever. I have nothing against the state of Israel. That's not the problem. The problem is this Zionist idea that everyone else needs to be liquidated, that all the Palestinians need to be murdered. They don't see they're committing genocide, but there again we become what we hate, right? They had genocide committed on them by the Nazis. Now they're like the abused kid who grows up to become the abusive parent. So they're just passing that karma along to another population and saying, this will never happen to us again. And we'll demonstrate that by showing you that we'll do it to us or group this time. So they're caught in an unconscious vicious circle, a metaphysical vicious circle that they can't get out of. And then unfortunately, Washington and London is supporting this, is behind them, which I think is really pathetic. There are people dying miserably of starvation without electricity or running water. They're blocking food shipments from coming in from Turkey. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. And it could end up being a black hole that drags us all down into a nuclear war. We've got all these alignments now with China and Iran, North Korea and Russia and then all the Arab states, every single one of them is against what is going on. Israel is putting a gun to its head doing this, because this could really escalate. I don't know what Turkey's going to do, but Pakistan has said they're happy to loan Turkey nuclear missiles if they need them. So Israel is in the middle here, and it's only there for the United States to have a foothold in the Middle East. That's why it exists in the first place, and why the U.S. is defending it. So we've got all these states lined up against Israel, and I see it as a disaster waiting to happen. It could end up with the complete liquidation of Israel. This has happened before, has it not? Under the Romans. So since there's a physical precedent for it, that means in the etheric morphic field, it can happen again. So that may be what's happening. And it's about the same time, morphologically too, on Spengler's timeline for Israel, if they lose it again. And they very well might.
I guess I have to ask you about the October 7th. What would you say would have been the correct reaction of Israel?
I think they should have done what they did with Munich. Keep quiet and send assassins out to get the guys responsible. Hunt them down. Don't inflict all of this on the population that don't deserve it. Why do they deserve to have the shit beat out of them because of these Hamas jerks? And I don't support Hamas whatsoever. But the irony is that Hamas was a creation of Israel itself to try and divide the Palestinians by splintering them into multiple sectors, such as the PLO, the PFLP, to get them to fight each other. So Hamas was ironically a creation of Israel itself. Yeah, I mean, I'm not for Hezbollah or Iran or anything like that. I'm for peace. That's the thing here I'm interested in. People settle down, live together, and stop killing each other. So I don't care which side is what's going on. But it's clear Israel here is the aggressor, even though they did have the right to respond to that October 7th attack, but they should have done it covertly instead of this mess.
So from your analysis, they're basically using the October 7th terrorist attack as a alibi to
an excuse.
Yeah,
an excuse to do what they've wanted to do since 47, wipe out the native inhabitants. This is a scenario that we're seeing repeated over and over again throughout history, just like the Anglos wiped out the Native Americans, although they're still there. But that was a genocide of 90 million people. We got 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, but we had 90 million Native Americans that were liquidated. They're still here, and they'll remain. They're not going anywhere. But it'll probably be something like that kind of a scenario.
All right. Okay. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess lastly, I would like you to tell us again about your online school, and also maybe I would after you. Yeah, just tell us about the online school, and I'll ask the closing question, and we can wrap it up. Yeah.
Okay. So I founded the online school about 2.5 years ago out of frustration with academe. And I think that Carol Quigley has this idea when he talks about civilizations evolve with what he calls an instrument of expansion. Like the feudal period was an instrument of expansion, both geographically and intellectually, but that there will come a time when it will petrify. The institution will petrify. So you've got 3 solutions to that. Either you can go around it, as the British did with the monarchy by creating parliament. You go around the problem, leave it alone, or you can react against it, dismantle it, destroy it, or you can do a reformation. So I've decided to choose the paradigm of going around academe, leave it alone, and found my own school where we can have the freedom to talk about Goethe, Spengler, Nietzsche, Steiner, whoever we want to talk about, without having to worry about reputations being, oh, what are my colleagues going to think? See, I don't have any colleagues. So there's no penalty. I can say whatever I want because there's no penalties for what and we do in class. We speak our minds. There are no limitations. There's no censorship.
Okay.
I will discourage rabble rousing. That's all. But other than that, so yeah, it's online, and we're starting a class on Heidegger in 3 weeks. I will create the advertisement and put that out. We'll go through the basic writings of Heidegger and the basic ideas, and that's a preparatory so we can get back to French Pomo, because we started with Baudrillard and now Virolio for French Poema because they're relatively easygoing compared to Derrida and Foucault and Deleuze, where you have to go through Heidegger first to understand what they're doing. And so we'll end up with Deleuze. That'll be the ending point for that. We may at that point then just go back to the Greeks and start again because go through Plato and Aristotle and so forth, and then a class on medieval scholastic philosophy. So I'm trying to cover the entire history of philosophy in the class. But as well, we're reading works of fiction. We read Joyce's Ulysses. We read Finnegan's Wake. We read Moby Dick. Now we're reading Thomas Pynchon's Mason and Dixon. We had already done Gravity's Rainbow. So we're having a lot of fun. So if you're interested, just send me an email, johndavidebert@gmail.com, and just tell me you're interested. I have a lot of classes for sale because I record all the classroom discussions, and there's usually about 8 or 16, depending on which type of class it is. I usually sell the whole thing for $150, and then I'll email you all the lectures. So you can get, we've done classes on the history of German idealist philosophy. We did a class on Nietzsche. We read 7 of Nietzsche's best books. We went through The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann. All kinds of philosophy, art, and culture. I'm preparing a big class on the history of art, but that's more ambitious because of all the images that it involves. So that'll be a little further down the road, probably next year. But yeah, jump aboard. The average fee, if you want to attend, is $250 if in the classroom. If you only want to receive the videos, then a subscription is $150.
Okay.
So that's about what they go for. I looked online. Like Michael Millerman charges more than that. He charges about $300 per class on average. And then Justin Murphy, though, charges like $500. I started off doing that, but I got too many people complaining, so I chopped it in half down to $250. He was doing real good with his Indie Thinkers platform, Justin Murphy. He had me on there to teach a young course. And we had like 30 students in there. A lot of people willing to pay $500, apparently. So anyhow, so mine's cheaper than most. So
great. I'll make sure to include the.
I also do astrology readings. For those of you who are interested in astrology, it's always very illuminating. Those are $150 for a 1-hour reading on Zoom. I've never had a disappointed client yet, not one. So hit me up for that too if you want to arrange that. I can also do tutoring as well. I have students that I tutor that are outside the class. So I'm a very busy guy, right?
Yeah.
I don't have enough time to do anything because there's so many things I'm busy doing.
Yeah, and so I'll make sure to include the links and the pictures covering everything you just said. Also, so the last question I guess would be, so Marshall McLuhan speaks about this idea about when, in what media ecology does your brain mature. So for example, he speaks about the fact that you might encounter, so a person whose central nervous system was formed before the invasion of personal computers and laptops and short format videos and this and that, their brain is more oriented towards content and they have more attention span. They can concentrate. They have this linear thought pattern, this and that. Lots of people from my channel, since I attract youngsters who are Gen Z, there's this new problem that is born, that is completely alien to someone like you. Namely that there are youngsters who realize that they need culture, they need education, they need to read those classics, but they find themselves in a situation where they can't stimulate themselves with those books. They don't have the attention span for it. They don't have the practice and diligence to sit down and go through all those books. Well, you've never faced that problem, of course, but would you have any advice to youngsters who want to do it, who realize that that's a problem, but kind of have this problem of lacking the necessary mental capacity to do it? And do you have what's your? Yeah,
I mean, I can't do Audible, but some people can because I can't. I don't like. If my thoughts stray, it's hard to go back to where I was. Whereas with a book, I have complete control over the process. I never get lost. It's very tactile. And so I think that helps you remember things. If you have a tactile interaction with an actual book, especially if you got a highlighter and a pen and you go through each passage that you highlight, you'll remember it.
I guarantee you that you will. Or if you make a note there, because it'll like taking a screenshot of those pages, you'll remember the information. So that's how you read. Read very carefully and interact with concrete physical texts. Whereas I find reading e-texts, which I have to do, that's surely because of money and convenience. I don't remember them as well, though. When I'm trying to recapture the information, it doesn't come as clearly. So there's that. But if you're talking about, like, where do I begin? Where do I start? Read The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. That should be a magical thing that will open up all kinds of thought processes, and then pursue his footnotes. How did he figure this out? Read The King and the Corpse by Heinrich Zimmer, his mentor, and then go through and read The Masks of God. If you have any spiritual problems, that will solve it. He goes through the entire history of mythology and shows you how it worked, how it came into being, what the context was. That will start situating you within a concrete world horizon. And then if you're ambitious, do The Decline of the West. Start with the abridged version, which is less intimidating, as I did in college. And I kept getting more and more ambitious, and finally I decided to read the whole damn thing. That will set up the correct paradigm of history where everything will make sense. Part of the problem with history is that it's badly taught. I never was in one history classroom, whether it was high school or college, where I wasn't bored. You know, these guys, it's just a mindless sequence of dates, of random things happening. With morphology, with Goethean morphology applied to those dates, you remember them because they're structures that have an organic unity to them, where you can see that things are not so accidental. They're fulfilling morphological requirements. So I would start there. That's where I started with all those guys. And read The Portable Young, which is a 1-volume edition, edited by Joseph Campbell, so you know it's going to be good. Those are the starting blocks, I think, to start piecing together a bigger world picture. And that will all lead you to a wider and wider horizon.
Would you? So it's very good that you mentioned history, because I've always had a problem with regular history books and textbooks, just facts just thrown around. It doesn't make any sense. Right. So can you tell us youngsters what history books should we start with in order for us to get this sense of what was going on in the past?
You're breaking up there.
So basically, I was asking you about the history books that we should read that are not boring.
Start with A Study of History by Arnold Toynbee.
Okay.
The large edition, the big illustrated one, for about $30 on Amazon.
Yeah.
Start with that. It's very, and he doesn't have a morphological structure, but he does have a structure, a sequence of stages that every civilization goes through. It's just cause effect. It's not predetermined, but nonetheless, the vocabulary of Toynbee really helps with illuminating Spengler too, because he's got terms that Spengler doesn't have, like satellite societies, internal proletariat versus external proletariat. He's very illuminating. Creative minority, dominant minority, the social formation in general, disaffection with it. He's got all these things that Spengler does not have. I prefer Spengler because I prefer the metaphysics, but they're both great. That's a good starting place right there. Yep, study of history.
Great, I think. All right then. I think that's good. I mean, it was.
Oh, Nicholas, that was an epic conversation.
That was really good. Yeah.
This long. That was 3.5 hours. Yeah. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
I wish every interviewer was like you, because you do your homework. That's the ideal interviewer, that you've read all the same stuff. So that really helps a lot. I had a lot of fun, Nicholas.